dog and my own bed. Seeing as how none of them materialized, no matter how much I whined about it, I took more pills and tried pacing the room a few times to walk off some of the soreness. My body wanted rest, but my mind was a whirl. This ill-conceived trip had certainly complicated my life. One of the first steps, I supposed, would be to call my insurance company and find out how long it would take to get my Jeep back in working order. According to the little wallet card, they had a 24-hour number for claims, and since I wasn't getting back to sleep on the hard-as-a-board mattress anytime soon, I called it. A benefit, I discovered, of placing a business call at 1 o'clock in the morning is the call gets answered right away. No sitting on hold, no jingly music ad nauseum. The female voice at the other end wasn't exactly perky at this hour, but she did offer sympathy about the accident and asked if I was all right. She took all the information and said she would send a claims adjuster to the yard where the Jeep sat, cold and alone. The thought depressed me. By the time I finished the call, I was tired again, but couldn't shake the antsy feeling. I lay down again and actually dozed for a few hours. By daybreak, I decided there was nothing holding me here. I gathered my skimpy possessions and got into my generic rental for the 2-hour drive home. Drake seemed surprised to see me when I walked into the kitchen in time for the coffee he was brewing. He set down the carafe and pulled me close. I moaned a little when his hug squeezed a sensitive muscle, and he held me at arm's length. "You okay?" he asked, running a finger gently near the cut on my forehead. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm just going to clean up and change clothes before I head for the office." He gave me a firm look, seeing past my brave facade. The truth was, I felt bone-tired. My plan to start the day early and continue full speed suddenly didn't seem so great. He steered me toward a chair at the kitchen table. "Let me get us some breakfast. Then you're going to take it easy all day." Is that an order? I really hoped it was. Freckles sensed my vulnerability and laid her head on my lap. I watched as Drake cracked eggs into a bowl and chopped some onions and tomatoes. In very short order, he had made an omelet and toast and set a plate in front of me. "Eat. I'm calling Ron to let him know you won't be in. After breakfast, you can have a nice hot shower, and then I want you to sleep as long as you possibly can." It sounded heavenly. He hovered over me and even wrapped my favorite big fluffy robe around me when I came out of the shower. I barely heard him say something about keeping Freckles out of my way for the day as he closed the bedroom door behind them. I sank into my luxurious mattress and pulled the bedding over me, cocooned in another dose of muscle relaxers. A brief thought intruded of talking to Ron about Jay Livingston and the diamond ring, but I shut it firmly out. The room was dark when I awoke, momentarily confused about the time of day when I saw the clock said 8:19. Had I slept nearly 12 hours? I could hear the soft sounds of the television in the other room, and there was a strip of light under the bedroom door. A shadow crossed it, and the door gave a slight rattle. Freckles somehow knew I was awake. I stretched and discovered I was less sore than I'd been earlier. Slipping into soft sweats and a t-shirt, I brushed my teeth and ran a brush through my hair. The view in the mirror brought me back to reality. The cut on my forehead wasn't bad, but a huge purple bruise had bloomed on my right cheek. The red scuff on my chin meant I must have scraped it on the carpeted floor mat. No point in trying to hide it from Drake. He'd already seen it all. But I would have to scrounge up some foundation makeup before I went out in public. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty," he teased when I emerged from the bedroom. I feel more like Rip Van Winkle. It is still Wednesday, isn't it? "It is, but I would have let you sleep several more hours if you needed them. You've been pushing pretty hard recently." True. The 2 trips to El Paso in 3 days had exhausted me. Not to mention I was tired of all the games between Bobby and Marcy Lorento and Jay Livingston. For all I knew, Marcy and Jay had cooked up the idea of substituting another ring, and the two of them might be about to head south for a lengthy vacation together. It wouldn't hurt my feelings at all if they did so, as long as Bobby didn't try to break down our door again.
"You have a few messages,"
Drake said. He'd paused his TV show and left the couch. He pointed at a note lying on the coffee table.
"Want something to eat?"
I picked up the slip of paper. "No thanks, I'm fine for now."
"Oh, besides that one, Ron called to see if you were coming in today. That was around noon, and I told him not to count on it. I guess he wanted to tell you about some pawn shop guy. And Victoria offered to bring soup, but I assured her we already had a pot of stew from Elsa. It's in the fridge, whenever you're ready for it."
Wow, a lot of fuss over my tiredness.
"And the accident. Everyone's concerned."
He nodded toward the paper in my hand.
"That's the insurance adjuster who went out to look at your Jeep."
The note only contained a name and phone number. He didn't give you any information?
"Well, yeah, he did. It's not good. He said the body damage to the rear hatch, door, and quarter panel would cost more to repair than the vehicle's current value. So they're going to total it and give you the book value."
I sighed. I was afraid of that. All the way home I was thinking about it. Sally had a repair job done on her van a while back, and I was astounded at how much the body work costs. Hers was minor, and it was over $1,000.
"The man suggested you can keep the car if you'd rather. Spend just enough to get it running again and not repair the body damage."
Yeah, and drive around in a bashed vehicle with doors that barely open and close. I remembered having to give a hard shove just to get my driver door open. I don't see that working out too well.
"We could go car shopping tomorrow."
Next to dental procedures, I hate car shopping the most. The whole scene where you walk onto a car lot and immediately become targeted by every salesperson around. No, don't make me do it. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll have some of that stew after all. I wandered toward the kitchen, halfway wishing I'd just stayed in bed. Chapter 34. Drake postponed a client's job in the morning, and we spent a few hours at the car mall, where the experience was every bit as delightful as I'd imagined. When, at the Ford place, the third sales guy beelined his way toward us, I took Drake's arm and we ducked between pickup trucks. Our dash for freedom felt so good, I couldn't force myself to go back.
"Why don't you shop around online and see what you find?"
he suggested as we pulled into the parking lot at Super Salad for lunch. Why hadn't I thought of that? Most likely because my head recently had been filled with all the natter of teen girls, rich people's marital drama, and the blunder I'd made with the $100,000 diamond ring. The auto crash was the thing that topped it all off. We loaded plates with salad and bread and found a table. I stared out at my rental car in the parking lot. With the daily meter ticking, the decision about new wheels wasn't something I should delay. I pulled out my phone and browsed the subject of cars. The problem was I didn't even know what make or model interested me, and trying to make decisions based on the tiny images on a phone screen wasn't making the task easier.
"A few more days with the rental isn't going to matter,"
Drake said, reading my mind.
"Take your time. As long as you deliver me back home to get my truck. I do need to get back to my business at some point today."
Ron had texted me twice, and I knew I needed to get back to RJP business as well. We finished our meal and headed home. Drake gave me a kiss and got into his truck. I headed for the front door, planning to retrieve Freckles from her crate and take her to the office with me. We were headed back to the white sedan when the blue Corvette coasted to a stop at our curb. "Hey, where's your Jeep?" Clover asked. I explained the situation. She eyed the plain little car with sympathy. "Bummer." "Yeah, the worst part is deciding what to replace my Jeep with." She bit her lower lip, thinking. You could drive Zane's car, she said. I looked up the street at the red convertible in their driveway. A flutter resembling excitement went through me. Oh, I really can't take it. I'll let you. I mean her being back at school now, you know. I didn't know. I had to give her credit for sticking with her story, though. It's just, I'm not sure about the fallout. You know, what if she comes back and is furious, or what if your parents blow a gasket over your giving permission to something they didn't agree to? And yet the lure of that gorgeous car tugged at me. Call them, except they're off somewhere crazy right now. She said it so simply, confident it would be no problem at all to loan an expensive car to a neighbor who'd just wrecked her own. Still, no one on earth could say the vet wasn't at least 100 points higher on the coolness scale than the boring little sedan in my driveway. I'll call your Aunt Donna. If she says it's okay, I'll consider it. Drake would say I was stretching toward a midlife crisis. Ron would be so envious he would turn purple. My own practical streak told me there was no way to follow or surveil anyone on any of our cases. But the latent kid in me said, yes, go for it. Clover sat there at the curb looking at me. She meant now. I pulled out my phone where I'd stored Donna Delaney's phone number. I'd no sooner said hello than Clover held out her hand, wiggling her fingers. I handed over the phone. Aunt Donna, hey, Charlie needs to borrow Zane's car for a while, but she's embarrassed to ask. So is it okay? It is, right? I grabbed the phone away. Donna, hi. Look, this wasn't my idea, but it would be a big help. I'm paying for a rental, but I still need a few days to get something new lined up for myself. Charlie, you didn't really even need to ask. I know both girls think highly of you, and those are their cars, not mine. Take it if you need it. Wow, well, this is so generous of you. Not me, the girls. Really, it's fine. She paused a second. I know you can't really talk with Clover right there, but do let me know sometime how you're coming along with locating Zane, okay? I wished I had better news for her, but promised another call in a day or two. Now the pressure was really on. Clover had picked up the gist of the call, put her car in reverse, and hit the gas. It whined its way back home, and I trotted up the street to catch up. So I'll grab the key, Clover called out, halfway to their front door when I walked up the drive. She popped back outside a few seconds later, and we spent a few minutes together while she gave me some tips and tricks to know about the car. I slipped into the driver's seat and breathed deeply. I wouldn't say it had the new car smell. After all, a teenager had driven it for a year or two already. But it was way new compared to mine. Once again, it hit me how unlikely it was that Zane had gone away to school without taking this baby along. Clover seemed distracted. She hopped back in her car and waved goodbye while I sat in the purring sports car. Wow. Okay. Things had taken a turn, and I needed to think of practical considerations, such as turning in the rental and getting to the office. But the lure of simply putting my foot on the gas pedal tugged at me. I carefully backed it out of the Delaney driveway, getting used to the different configuration of blind spots, put her in gear, and cruised to my own house. 10 minutes later, with Freckles perched on the passenger seat, I roared into my parking slot at the Victorian in fine style. The whole point of driving a car like this is for people to see you in it. And that urge was met with gratification for me when Ron opened the kitchen door and openly gawked. I clambered out of the low-slung car a little awkwardly. It was a whole different set of moves from merely sliding off the seat of my higher-riding Jeep. "What's this?" "It's on loan." Drake had already given him the highlights about the crash, my night in the hotel, and my subsequent day of rest. Ron gave the car a skeptical sizing up. I know. How many times have you told me a red sports car wasn't your best choice either?" I said with a pointed glance at his Mustang. "I'm not keeping this car."
It is very cool, though.
It's very cool. We both stared at the car while Freckles made her rounds of the backyard. I supposed I could consider a sports car of some kind. Maybe not quite this flashy, maybe more subdued color. Well, it was a decision I didn't have to make this minute. We walked through the kitchen where Ron picked up the mug he'd been filling when I drove up. I went up to my office and he joined me a few seconds later.
So, this week has been eventful,
he said, settling onto my sofa while I turned on my computer. I don't hold much hope that the police in El Paso will put a lot of effort into catching Jay Livingston and getting Bobby's ring back. I described the cramped office and lone detective who'd taken the report, ending with the fact that I had no intention of traipsing back and forth on that long stretch of highway again. Couldn't Bobby just file an insurance claim for the ring being stolen, show them the cheap substitute he got in return?
If he carried a rider on his policy for jewelry of that value, sure, I suppose he could.
If he's not too embarrassed for the story to spread that much further.
Yeah, that too.
You think he'd do that?
Who knows? Right now he wants me to keep working on it. While you were away, he and Marcy started to make up. He went back home last night.
I felt a groan rise in my throat. Those two were a pair, all right. So can we drop the case? That's my question.
I'm meeting with Bobby later today and I'll tell him. I need to fill him in on my visit to that pawn shop guy, which is to say I basically didn't learn anything. But I did convince him to get his attorney to settle out of court for the punching incident.
Yeah, well, have fun with that. I am so done with both the Lorentos. I think they deserve each other and whatever happens to their fame and possessions. Ron grinned and headed toward his own office. I could only hope he agreed with me. Chapter 35. Hopefully, I'd seen the last of the battling Lorentos. I turned my attention back to our other case, figuring out how I was going to verify both Delaney twins were all right and get a picture for their aunt. Even this morning, Clover was sticking with the story that Zane was living in Las Cruces, although I smelled deceit all over the tale. Somehow, I needed enough proof to confront her and get the real skinny on it. I leaned back in my chair and thought about the reasons an otherwise gregarious young woman would choose to disappear. A man. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before. The most likely reason Zane wasn't around was because she'd run off with some guy. In another era, if she'd become pregnant, she might have been sent off to a home for unwed mothers and returned a few months later. But times had changed, and I couldn't see such a scenario now. Still, there were other reasons people moved away. The guy promised exotic travel, or he lived in another city, or there was some reason she needed to keep the relationship secret. I could see the desire for secrecy if this was someone her family didn't approve of, but Rick and Jane were hardly around, and they certainly didn't appear to have set any limits on their 2 daughters. The other puzzle I kept asking myself, how much does Clover know? Surely she was in on the secret. It didn't seem logical her twin would have gone away without a word, not to mention Clover's lack of worry and the cover story about Zane being away at school. No, she was in on it. My challenge was to get close enough to find the opportunity to get her to talk about it. How would I do that? I drummed my fingers on the desk. Maybe Clover had inadvertently handed me the answer. Social media. I opened my browser and went to Facebook. Over the past few years, several friends had suggested I set up accounts, including Twitter and Instagram. I'd done it, friended a few people, and discovered I either needed to monitor it constantly to keep up with the crowd, or I had to forget about it. Life being busy enough already, I did the latter. Now my social media skills were severely lacking. I found the little cheat sheet where I'd written all my passwords and logged into my Facebook account. A few dozen comments awaited my viewing, but I discovered most were hopelessly outdated tidbits from friends who had, no doubt, given up on hearing from me. A few friend requests waited to be accepted or denied. Deleting the obvious scams from handsome soldiers in military uniform, men I'd never seen in my life, I noticed 2 of the requests came from Clover and Zane. I accepted both. Clover's page contained the photos from our hike and picnic. She was right. The one of me and Freckles touching noses had received a lot of likes, along with comments like, "Aw, how cute." Apparently, drawn-out words and loads of punctuation were the way to bring extra emotion to short and simple messages. At any rate, I found myself a little flattered by the attention. On her timeline, a day after the picnic with me, Clover had posted a charming heads-together shot of herself and Zane, dressed up and maxed out on their makeup. The caption read, "Checking out Rads, best time ever." I recognized the name of the club that had opened a year or so ago to lots of media attention. Apparently it had caught on with the younger crowd. It might be worth a trip if I could spot the 2 girls together, and if not, perhaps I could get a conversation going with their friends and learn more. I could mention it to Drake and see if my dear hubby was up for a night on the town. Then I quickly discarded the idea. Not only was nightclub life not at all his thing, the 2 of us would stand out just as badly as someone Clover's age walking into a retirement home. With the touches of gray on his hair, Drake would most likely be taken for law enforcement. If the kids smelled a narc, they'd scatter like roaches in the light. It would be better if I walked into the club with a girlfriend. Who did I know with the playfulness, not to mention the clothes, to dress us up properly? I needed a pal who would inspire me beyond my perfumed stay-at-home-with-a-book demeanor. The Facebook page was still open, and I scanned the photos of my friends. Geez, we were becoming a dull crowd. Linda was a doctor with such a busy practice she rarely stayed up past 10 o'clock. Sally was younger, but she had a husband and 2 kids. With the toddlers, she was barely awake most days, much less into the evening hours. Victoria. My sister-in-law has sparkle and energy. She's a classy dresser, but she knows fashion well enough to young it down a bit. She'd be the one to come up with something we could wear. I called her. "I'm tied up with something tonight," she said. "Could we make it tomorrow night?" "Sure." An extra 24 hours to work up my courage would be a good thing, right? I put the phone down and went back to the computer. Zane Delaney's Facebook page showed a half-dozen selfies. Prominent in the recent ones were posts about how she was loving college life. Interesting. I scrolled to one that read, "In dorm room with my BFF Missy." It was a girl I'd spoken to briefly outside her dorm at UNM. The one who'd gone to the river party, supposedly was Zane, although I hadn't known how to positively identify her at the time. Okay, if Missy attended school here in Albuquerque, how was it going to fool anyone to imply she was now down in Las Cruces at New Mexico State? The background behind the 2 girls certainly did look like a dorm room. I could see scattered clothing and general clutter that defines living quarters of kids all over the world. Another post, dated 2 weeks ago, showed Zane wearing a studious-looking pair of glasses which reflected the glare of a computer screen. "Late-night studies," said the post. The girls' surroundings showed muted colors in a dim room. I clicked the photo and it came up larger on my screen. The blue and tan color scheme seemed familiar, but I couldn't immediately think where I'd seen it. I read the comments her friends had made, commiseration over the tough schedule and encouraging little prods like, "Don't work too hard, ha ha ha." I zoomed the picture, trying to spot Zane's tattoo, but in each photo she wore her hair in front of her ears, concealing her neck. I scrolled back over her timeline, looking for some indication when she'd left for college, or wherever it was she'd gone. Prior to last October, nearly all the photos on both of the twins' pages showed the 2 together. Since then, there were a lot more of each girl individually. Something felt different about the things they talked about. Something just a touch off. But what? I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. I spent another hour zipping around Twitter and Instagram, looking for activity by either Zane or Clover Delaney. There was plenty, and pretty soon the whole scene began to blur in my brain. The frequency of posts, both with the girls I knew and with their many friends, was mind-boggling. A lot of importance was placed on receiving approval, likes and little smiley faces, hearts, flowers, the occasional sad face or frown. Observing them closely, there were undercurrents of the sort I remembered from the horrible, hormonal middle school years. I thought of the importance these kids placed on social media likes. From an adult perspective, it seemed so needy and desperate, but I was young enough to remember the pressures. It really seemed doubly needy when I considered these were no longer 13 and 14-year-olds, but grown young women. Sad to know so much importance rested on popularity. My shoulder ached from steering the mouse and my neck was screaming in protest. I needed to move. I wandered across the hall to Ron's office, but his chair sat empty. He may have told me he was going out. I didn't remember. Scary to think how absorbed I'd become in the social media world, and how quickly. I glanced at his desk and saw his computer monitor still lit. Okay, so he couldn't have gone too far or for too long. The image on the screen caught my attention. Apparently it was the homepage of Innocent Times, the alibi company Bobby Laurento had been using to help cover his tracks during his little cheating escapades. An idea leapt into my head. I sat in Ron's chair and put my hand on the computer mouse. Clicking the About Us tab on the page, I found a phone number and an email address. At the bottom of the page was the required tagline with the site owner's company name and address. I found a pad of sticky notes and a pen and wrote it all down. Chapter 36. I frightened Ron into sloshing his coffee when I left his office as he was coming up the stairs. "You need me for something?" he asked, checking the front of his shirt. "No, just stretching my legs." I hurried back to my desk where I placed a call to Innocent Times and requested an appointment with Rex Stoddard. I may have given the impression I was interested in their services. I may have also given the impression I was important enough to only deal directly with the company owner. It could have been because I threw the name Bobby Laurento into the conversation in a way that was not entirely truthful. 10 minutes later, I was out the door and heading toward the uptown area that tends to house brokerage firms and insurance offices. Innocent Times was located in an unprestigious suite of offices on a third floor where I imagined, if they'd had windows, the view would consist of some treetops and the windows of the building next door. I supposed it was the sort of business that didn't need to impress its clients with a lot of frills. The inner sanctum look was more in keeping with their mission anyway. Rex Stoddard greeted me in his office with the word private on the door. I supposed it was to differentiate it from the other two doors beyond the tiny reception area, one of which I suspected might be a restroom. Somehow I had pictured the operation being a whole lot bigger. It could be my name-dropping had nothing to do with getting an appointment with the owner. Stoddard was about 40, with a round body, round face, and receding sandy brown hair. Somehow I'd pictured a guy who would start a company to cover up infidelities would be the sort who had needed those services himself. Sitting across from the geeky guy here, I wasn't getting a match to that image. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "This guy couldn't possibly juggle multiple women because he'd never have more than one date at a time, right?" I felt a blush coming on. He'd pretty well nailed it. "But don't you see, I was the guy in high school and college, the one all the other guys used as their alibi. Honey, don't worry about it, I was studying with Rex. Honey, Rex and I only went out for a couple of beers. They'd buy me a 6-pack if I would come up with a receipt showing 2 beers purchased at some innocent enough spot like Applebee's. I got where I could finesse those receipts to show the exact day and time the friend wanted. I mean, those little slips of paper looked so real the restaurant employees couldn't tell they were fake." "Okay, call me impressed." "Pretty soon my buddies were sending their other buddies. I quit swapping the favor for beer, and it was amazing how much cash these men were willing to come up with, especially once we all reached the age where they were starting to have wives.
I branched out to include receipts from airlines and hotels, little backup materials a guy could leave lying around when he said he'd been away on a business trip. There I was, going for a degree in accounting and making 4 times more with my alibis than I would ever bring in as a CPA. I dropped out and turned my little venture into a business.
You didn't feel guilty about all this?
Hey, I wasn't the one doing the cheating or telling the lies. All that's on them.
I supposed he had a point about that. I also wondered how much money he was really making. He certainly wasn't working out of glamorous digs here.
Yeah, I know, Stoddard said. You'd think I would be in the penthouse suite of offices, right?
I really needed to work on my poker face. This guy was too good at reading my mind.
I don't waste money on non-essentials. My clients don't pay for me to have an office with a fabulous view. These days, most of them never even come here or meet me face-to-face. Low-key is the thing. I've got a staff of 4, a stock portfolio in the millions, and 3 homes on 2 continents. It's all I need.
Sounded like plenty to me.
So, what can I do for you? You don't really look like the typical cheating wife.
A glance at my wedding band.
If you want an admission from me that your husband is one of our clients, sorry, no way you'll get that info from me.
I actually laughed. Drake and I worked together so much and shared all our financial information. Neither of us could possibly fit a sneaky affair into our days, much less cover it up. I handed him my RJP business card and explained I was here about the how, not the who. I'm looking into a case of twins, thinking one of them is covering up for the other, but I haven't exactly figured out how she's doing it.
Twins. Nice. Identical?
I nodded.
Oh, man, they've got it easy.
I told him about the social media pages and the selfies. I'm thinking one girl could be posting for both of them. With the log-on information for both accounts, I suppose even I could manage that much.
Well, yeah, easy peasy.
The one girl claims to be away at college, but the photos on her page look to me as if they could be locations here in Albuquerque. Is there any way I can find out where she was when she put the pictures up on Facebook? He nodded slowly, contemplating. He picked up the handset of his desk telephone and punched a button.
Buddy, come into my office for a minute?
He replaced the phone and looked at me again.
I started old school, and my specialty is still printed documents. Buddy handles all that tech stuff.
I heard one of the other doors open and close, and a moment later a young man appeared. He didn't look more than 15, but I supposed he could be in his mid-20s. Guessing ages is getting increasingly difficult these days. He had longish curly brown hair and wore jeans and a vintage rock band t-shirt, with Tour 2006 above the group's photo.
Yeah, boss. Buddy, this is Charlie. Charlie, Buddy Blue.
Buddy leaned against the doorframe, not offering to shake hands, acknowledging me with only a nod. I asked whether it was possible to find out where a particular text message or social media post had come from.
I could do it,
Buddy said. Is it possible for someone to fake their location? Say a person here in Albuquerque make it look as if they were in Las Cruces when they posted.
Is either of these girls super tech-savvy?
I thought of Zane in her platform shoes, fitted jeans, and designer bags. Clover was somewhat outdoorsy, but still dressed and acted like the fashion diva rich kid she was. I doubt it, I told him.
She'd have to know a bit about advanced forward link trilateration timing if she can get into the network. Or there's always a way of interpolating antenna signals.
He pretty much lost me after the word advanced. I got another idea. If I could bring you one of their phones, could you get the information? I hated to use the word hack, but that's what it amounted to.
Sure.
He backtracked a little.
It depends on how far they went to cover up, you know? But talking about your average college kid, yeah, I can probably do it.
He went back to his lair and I talked price with Stoddard. The figure was a little shocking, but I knew we were going to pass it along to the Delaney's, and any parents who didn't keep better tabs on their kids deserved what they got when it came to the cost of tracking them down. Back in the parking lot, I climbed into the red Corvette and listened to the soft roar of its engine as I put her into gear and zoomed out of the parking lot. I wondered if I wasn't getting a little too accustomed to driving the fun machine. Chapter 37. Back at the office, I'd started upstairs when I heard voices from the conference room. One was definitely Ron's. The other was female. I peered around the corner and saw the back of Marcy Lorento. What on earth did she want? I shamelessly edged over to the wall beside the doorway and eavesdropped. With Sally gone for the afternoon, Ron hadn't thought to close the door. How convenient. "Just that I'm concerned about him," Marcy was saying. "I know." Ron has developed this soft and gentle method with the clients. "You do realize that Jay Livingston cheated you and Bobby out of a lot of money." I'm standing here thinking, and wasn't actually ever interested in a relationship with you. "Some police detective from El Paso called me," Marcy said. She sniffed a little and her voice broke. "I didn't quite understand why they're after Jay." "Let me spell it out. Jay bought Bobby's Super Bowl ring at the pawn shop. He put the word out the ring was for sale. He's not a collector. He had a cheap substitute ring ready, which he sold back to us, using your money, pretending the ring was Bobby's. Now he's in possession of the cash and the real ring. It's enough money to classify as grand theft, and that's what the police are interested in." "But..." "Picture it like this. You go to a shop and see a pair of Manolo Blahniks that you know are real. You love them. You buy them at full price. You get home and open the box and find the clerk substituted a different pair. They look similar, but you and all your friends will immediately know they're fake. It's kind of like that." I stepped into view. Let's not forget the elaborate scam he set up to make me believe he lived in an upscale neighborhood, and the pains I took to try to recover your money. For emphasis, I touched the big bruise on my cheek, although Livingston couldn't directly be blamed for my vehicle accident. Marcy blanched a little when she saw my injuries. "Oh, gosh." Ron intervened again. "Marcy, we'll continue to cooperate with the police and attempt to recover the ring, but I'm not going to track down Jay Livingston for you. You need to sort out your own marital woes. If I can offer a little advice, get yourself straight about what you want with Bobby. Stay with him or leave him, I don't care. But don't bring another man into the picture unless you are completely out of your marriage. There are way too many pitfalls, and you've only discovered one of them, being swindled by a crook." I gave a little amen to that. By the expression on her face, I had little hope she would take Ron's advice to heart. This whole messed-up relationship could still go any which way. Ron pulled Marcy's chair out for her. I held up her purse. Yes, it was a not-too-subtle effort to simply get her out of our offices. We watched from the front window as she got into her car and drove away. "Is it true? You plan to work with the El Paso police on this thing?" "They haven't asked for my input. If they do, I'll give whatever info I can." "It might be worth a call, just to follow up to see if they've found Livingston yet." He gave me a long-suffering stare. "You can if you want to. I only told Marcy what I did to get her out of here." It wasn't like my brother to get rid of a client. As long as they were willing to pay us to do something, anything at all, he would normally stick with them. Looked as if Ron was tiring of the power couple and their antics. "How's your search for a car coming along?" he asked as we climbed the stairs to our offices. "I'm liking the borrowed Corvette for now." "Don't get used to it." I know. I got to my desk to find Sally had left me a note saying Donna Delaney had called. She might have changed her mind about my use of Zane's car, and maybe Ron's suggestion was a little prophetic. I called Donna's number, got voicemail, and left a quick message. Then I went online for a little research on what vehicle I should consider buying. Sports cars were appealing, especially given my newfound infatuation with zipping around town in the borrowed one. But in reality, a two-seater wasn't at all practical for two of us and the dog to pack up for a weekend in the mountains. I gazed fondly at a few models on my computer screen, then switched my search toward vehicles with a bit of roomy cargo space. Before I could get to the research data on safety and reliability, and yes, I'm a little obsessive on that stuff, my phone rang. I saw Donna Delaney's name on the readout. "Hi, Charlie. Glad you called. I just thought I'd check in." "Afraid I have nothing new. I'm working an angle that might tell us more about the social media posts the girls are doing. So far, Clover seems to be in her normal routine around home, and I haven't had a call from Zane ordering me to give her car back." "Keep it as long as you need it. If she can't touch base any more frequently than this, well, she can just wait for the car." "I'll get together with Clover again soon. With my own car out of commission, I've been scrambling a bit to wind up another case and spend more time on yours. I will. I promise." She was nice about it, but I couldn't help feeling I should be doing more. The twins weren't children, but their youth, money, and good looks certainly put them in a vulnerable position. Again, I told myself to let Ron handle the Laurento mess so I could devote more time to this. Sidetracked by Marcy, my online search for a car, and now this phone call, I did a quick refocus. I was missing some important clue in the Delaney case. I felt sure of it. But what? I had to figure that out. Chapter 38. I called Clover's cell phone, but it went immediately to voicemail. Knowing how readily she usually dropped everything for a new phone call, I wondered if she was dodging me. I decided not to get paranoid about it, and shut down my computer in readiness to leave for the day. A truck from A1 Landscape Service was the only vehicle in evidence at the Delaney house. I recognized Tommy, the guy who cares for several neighborhood lawns, and waved up the street at him. He waved back, but didn't miss a beat with his noisy edger machine. Freckles was a little miffed at being left home all day. I let her out of the crate, and she followed me to the kitchen for a cookie. Eyeing the gazebo out back, I was tempted to make myself a lemonade and do nothing for the rest of the afternoon, but kick back until Drake came home. However, seeing as there'd been no shortage of fast food in my life recently, it would be smarter to get some exercise. I clipped the dog's leash to her collar, and we headed toward the park. As I tossed a tennis ball about 100 times and watched my little sweetie race to bring it back, I thought of my earlier conversation with Buddy Blue at Innocent Times. He'd said he might be able to answer my question about the location of the calls and social media posts if I could bring him the phone they'd been posted from. Once again, I chastised myself for not grabbing Zane's phone that night I'd had the chance. It was beginning to look as if I would have to come right out and ask to borrow it, and I could come up with no logical reason for that. As before, I wished this whole thing could be as simple as walking up to their house, finding both girls home at the same time, and snapping the photo I needed. It wasn't going to happen. I knew it. This was a silly fantasy. I informed Freckles she'd done enough fetching. You'd think a dog would figure this out when her tongue hung out and her feet began to drag. We leashed up and headed back toward home. The landscaper's truck was gone when I sighted the Delaney house. For one brief moment, I toyed with the idea of sneaking around back to see if my former route into their house was still available, but it was broad daylight now. I figured I'd better not push my luck. I realized belatedly that I really ought to tell Clover about the easy access. She was there alone a lot of the time, and the unlocked doors invited danger. On the other hand, I couldn't very well admit I knew about the 2 unlocked doors. I'd had no business in their backyard in the first place. Next time I was legitimately in the house, I would saunter through the kitchen and simply lock the connecting door myself. Sheesh, what a tangled web I'd woven. All those thoughts flashed through my head in an instant, and by the time we were adjacent with the house, Clover came roaring up the street in her blue vet. With a squeak of tires on concrete, she stopped inches from their garage door. She got out of the car and slammed the door. Her eyes looked red, her face blotchy. "Clover, everything okay?" I called out. She halted in surprise, as if anyone wouldn't have noticed her dramatic return. Freckles spotted the girl and tugged urgently at her leash. I let go of it and watched her race toward Clover while I crossed the lawn at a more leisurely pace. The energetic dog wiggled her whole body, hoping for a smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to let her rush you like that. You seemed upset just now." Clover gripped her car keys so hard I thought she would draw blood. She ignored the eager pup and turned toward her front door. We'd not been invited, but Freckles and I followed anyway. "Is it about Zane?" The wings of her long hair concealed her face as she took her time going through the 4 keys on her key ring. From the depths of her oversized purse, I heard her phone ding with an incoming text message. She ignored it and settled on a key for the front door. When she looked up, her eyes were moist. "Damn, Ryan," she said through gritted teeth. She seemed to realize I was waiting for an answer to my question. "It's fine. Everything's fine." "You don't look fine. Hey, how about coming over to our house for a while? I've got lemonade, and it's a nice afternoon to sit out back." I realized how Elsa the invitation sounded. Her phone chimed again, and she sniffed. "It's okay. I've got—" The words trailed off, and she waved vaguely. Not to be ignored, Freckles danced around both of us. When Clover unlocked her front door, the dog nosed it open and dashed inside. "Freckles!" I stomped madly at the trailing leash, trying to halt the dog, but she was way ahead of me. Clover stood aside, a little dazed, and I rushed to catch up with my dog, who had already discovered a bag of chips on the living room coffee table. She managed to tip it off the table and had crunched down a bunch of them before I could get my hands on her collar. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." When I looked up, I saw Clover smiling. "Sorry." I picked up the bag and held it high above my head. Freckles stared wistfully, completely oblivious as to why I was upset with her. At least the incident had diffused Clover's anger. She reached out to the dog and began ruffling her fur while I carried the near-empty bag to the kitchen. "It's not like I was going to eat the rest of it anyway," she said with a sad note to her voice. When I came back, she had dropped her large purse on the sofa, and a few items spilled out, including 2 cell phones. One of them chimed again, and the screen lit up. Little banners showed the 2 messages from the past few minutes. "Sorry, I need to get that." She let go of Freckles and scooped up the phone, turning toward her bedroom. There I stood, looking at the phone in the bright pink case, the one I'd been wishing I had borrowed the last time I spotted it. Clover was out of sight. The phone sat right there, in easy reach. Yeah, I'll admit it. I went for the easy grab. In a half-second, the phone was in my back pocket. For good measure, I tipped her purse a little further, scattering a few more items onto the sofa so the missing item wouldn't be so obvious. "I'll catch you another time, Clover," I called out from the front door. "Maybe we can do something later in the week." She appeared at the bedroom door down the hall. "Yeah, sure." I kept facing her so she wouldn't see my pocket, but her attention was riveted on her text messages. Freckles didn't quite understand why I was so eager to leave all the enticing scents she had discovered in the kitchen trash, but I was insistent with her. A couple minutes later, in the privacy of my own home, I pulled out the card from Innocent Times and dialed their tech guy, Buddy Blue. Chapter 39. Buddy suggested we meet at 5:30 at Rubio's, which I gathered was his favorite after-work watering hole. It was convenient for him, not so much for me, as I would be driving across town in rush-hour traffic. I budgeted some extra time and was ready to head out the door when Drake pulled into the driveway.
"Hey, you,"
he said, pulling me close for a kiss when I opened the front door for him.
I've got some exciting news.
Is it quick news? I'm supposed to be meeting a tech guy in 40 minutes. I glanced at my watch. Unless you want to come along and talk while I drive. He pointed to his flight suit, which was a little grungy at the knees. He'd obviously been assisting with maintenance.
I'll make it quick, then fill in the rest when you get back. I've got more details about that little cabin. It's been tied up in an old woman's estate, and no one has been up there in more than 20 years. I think we can get it.
I hadn't said anything, but I'd found myself thinking more and more about the little mountain place in recent days. My auto accident hadn't been serious, but it got me thinking about the risks of everyday life and the missed opportunities Drake and I had when I was out chasing down bad guys. Finding a place to truly get away from reality for a while seemed like heaven. I told him where I was going, and he said he would have dinner ready when I returned. Rubio's is one of those places that had a huge heyday about 20 years ago. Big hit when it opened, always crowded. It boasted great steak dinners and a bar where Albuquerque's business crowd hung out. The allure lasted a good 5 years, almost a record for this town, until the next new dazzler opened, and the crowd drifted 6 blocks up the street. For the past 10 years or so, Rubio's has held on by its teeth, supported by guys like Buddy Blue, who come by for a beer after work and rarely stay through the dinner hour. The menu has scaled way back, with the big sellers these days being nachos and chicken wings. Buddy sat at a roomy booth with a mini laptop open on the table. I sat across from him and handed over the phone I'd swiped from Clover's bag. I'd already asked him what he would charge to hack the account, and he said it depended on how long it took. He made a couple of little noises, which didn't tell me a whole lot, then pulled out a cord and plugged the phone into his computer. Quicker than it takes to tell about it, he unplugged it and handed the phone back to me. That's it?
Just the beginning. I have the phone's data. It's registered to a Zane Delaney. Now I have to search through it. What was it you wanted to know exactly?
Text messages, social media posts, and phone calls from the past couple months. Were they made from here in town or somewhere else? If elsewhere, I'd love to know where. He tapped keys and scowled at his screen. Maybe I should tell him if he keeps that up, he'll have permanently deep eyebrow wrinkles by the time he's 30.
Okay, let's see.
His finger zipped around over the touchpad.
Phone calls were definitely made locally. Did you look at this before you brought it? More than half of these were made to a number registered to Clover Delaney. There's a few international. I think the country's code is for Egypt. Not positive about that.
The parents. Donna had said Rick and Jane were on location in the desert somewhere. Are there incoming calls from Egypt, too?
Yep, sure are.
I noticed his beer was empty, asked if he'd like another, and flagged down the server to bring it, along with a glass of water for myself and some chips and salsa for the table. My tummy told me lunch had been a long time ago, and dinner was still a way off. Buddy reached for his new beer without taking his eyes from the computer screen.
Text messages. Looks like the same thing, although there's a ton more numbers exchanging those. We've got Missy, Ryan, Mom, Delphina, Clover, Jen, Ashley, Connor. You want a list of all the names?
It seemed that would be a lot of work, but while I pondered the usefulness of the information to me, he continued to tap away.
Never mind. It's simpler to copy them all and let you sort it out. What's your email?
I gave it to him, and a moment later heard my phone's familiar alert tone. I tapped the icon and spotted the message from Buddy. Scrolling through, I saw it was a long list. I would check it carefully later. Glancing around the room, I noticed couples at other tables, each person in his or her own little world on an electronic device. I wondered if anyone seeing us at a glance would think Buddy and I were a similar couple. I stifled a chuckle and picked up a tortilla chip.
So that's it for the simple part,
Buddy said, dipping into the salsa for the first time.
How much deeper do you want me to go?
What's the cost, and what would we learn?
I could get into the account and watch it live in real time, give you the person's movements and let you know who they're contacting. We can even go with text alerts to you if we see anything unusual. Rex bills my time at $200 an hour.
I gulped. It was quite a bit more than we were charging Donna for our time. I'd already sat here more than $100 worth.
Tonight's not on Rex's clock. Buy me a burger and the beers, and we're good for the little bit I've done here.
Thanks, I appreciate that. In this case, I pretty much know who's using the phone, and I don't think knowing her movements step by step will make much difference. He didn't seem especially disappointed. I got the feeling innocent times kept him plenty busy. I'd be happy to get you something fancier than a burger. Name it. Anything on the menu.
Burger's good. Maybe some extra fries.
I flagged the server again and placed the order, letting Buddy know I needed to head home. I had a good idea what Clover was up to using Zane's phone. I still had no idea why the elaborate cover-up. I puzzled over it as I drove home, and then it hit me. Most likely, Zane was up to something she wanted to conceal from her parents, so she'd left her phone with Clover so the calls to Mom and Dad would show up coming from her number. She'd probably run off with a guy and got herself a new phone, one they knew nothing about. Now that I had a logical answer, I wondered how I could go about proving it. Again, the only idea that came to me was to get closer to Clover and hope she would talk to me. Obviously, she was in on the game. Chapter 40. We sat under the gazebo, Drake and I, late into the evening, bundled into a warm comforter with mugs of hot chocolate at hand.
I talked with a young woman named Maria Greenwood. Her great-grandparents built a cabin in the 1930s and started a goat farm. Their name was Locke. As Maria recalled, the story was the goat venture didn't succeed, and the couple moved to Albuquerque to raise their children. When her husband died in an accident on the highway road crew where he worked, Sarah Locke became a writer. She moved to the cabin full-time once her 2 daughters were grown, and she lived there into her 90s. When she died, the estate was sort of a mess. The next generation was aging and no one wanted the place. Maria said she'd only been there a few times as a child and couldn't even remember how they got there, except it involved an extremely long walk. I wonder how such an elderly woman could manage. I asked the same question. Maria said Sarah kept a horse and would load her groceries and such into the saddlebags.
Wow, I can't imagine.
Here I'd been buzzing all over the city in a speedy sports car.
We take so many things for granted in modern life. Earlier you said you thought they would sell the place?
Maria is checking with the remaining heirs. Apparently not thinking of the repercussions, Sarah left this, her only remaining property, to all her heirs to be divided equally. It gave each of them such a pittance no one took charge. In the meantime, Sarah's daughters have passed on, and the next generation consists of Maria's mother and an uncle who lives in Texas. Maria said she couldn't see any reason they wouldn't sell. We're apparently the only people who've expressed an interest in the place in decades.
I snuggled beside him, my thoughts vivid with images of an old woman living in the tiny cabin, writing her books and rarely going to town. I wondered how I would be in my senior years, and found there was something immensely appealing about the pictures of Sarah Locke living independently, away from civilization. Next thing I knew, Drake was lifting my empty mug from my hands and suggesting we go to bed. I dreamed of the little cabin in the mountains, but in the weird way of dreamland, it now had 3 bedrooms, a hot tub, and a backyard pool. I woke with a start and wondered at the strangeness of the human psyche. The sun was well above the top of Sandia Crest when I walked out to the driveway and got into my borrowed Corvette. I really did need to get serious about vehicle shopping, so I wouldn't be responsible for this expensive toy much longer. I'd started the engine when I looked up to see Elsa coming across my lawn. I shut down again and stood beside the car. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you how things are going," she said in greeting. My brain zipped back through recent thoughts. New car, mountain cabin, but I knew she meant the Delaney twins. "I still don't know anything for certain, but we're getting closer." I didn't think it was a great idea to admit I'd taken Zane's phone and had a professional hacking job done on it. The girls seem to be in touch with each other and with their parents, so I'm sure everything's okay. There was no point in going into the details of everything I'd learned. I thought I could trust Elsa's discretion, but what if she blurted out something when she got together with her card ladies? Better to be vague at this point. I gave her a hug and got back into the car. Traffic was picking up by the time I reached the office. I was the first to arrive, so I started the coffee maker and switched on lights as I walked through the rooms. I checked voicemail where a call from an insurance adjuster waited for me. She told me the dollar amount they were paying for my totaled Jeep and asked me to come by their office to sign a release and collect my check. I blew out a breath. It wasn't nearly enough to buy a new one. Ron came in the kitchen door just then, interrupting my moody reflections. I joined him at the coffee machine.
"How's things?"
he asked in such a chipper voice, I knew it probably meant he and Victoria had great early morning sex. I filled him in on what I'd learned from Buddy Blue. Clover Delaney is obviously a part of whatever her sister is hiding. Maybe if I spend a little more time with her, I can get her to open up and tell me about it. He dumped 2 heaping spoonsful of sugar into his coffee and gave it a stir. What about your case? Any word on Bobby Lorento's ring?
"I called the detective in El Paso late yesterday. He didn't have much for me. Said he would call if there was progress."
I suppressed a wave of impatience. 2 cases, vague clues but no answers. Last night's conversation with Drake about the cabin had turned my thoughts toward our plans and future, and that's where I wanted to go right now, not traipsing about in circles that involved the problems of spoiled rich people. I carried my coffee and the message sheet where I'd written the insurance lady's name to my office. Ron's head appeared at my doorway.
"Meant to tell you, Vic says she has to cancel tonight. We've unexpectedly got the boys for a couple of days."
I'd nearly forgotten our impromptu plan to go to Rad's nightclub. Oh well, I most likely wouldn't have learned anything new about the Delaney girls anyway. That's fine. I wasn't much up for it anymore. Back to the insurance lady. I phoned her and we made an appointment in an hour's time. She said I would need to bring the title to my Jeep, which meant to dash back home to get the document from the safe. I turned into the neighborhood right behind the blue Corvette and followed Clover to our street. As I began to pull into my driveway, I noticed her movements became erratic, so I parked the red Vet and walked over. Her car sat at a skewed angle in their driveway, and Clover was leaning out the open door as if she couldn't work up the energy to stand up. I rushed to her side. "Clover, what's wrong?" She looked up at me with bleary eyes. "Sweetie, it's 9 a.m. Are you drunk?" "Probably." I extended a hand to help her out of the low car seat. "Come on, let's get you inside so you can sleep it off." "I slept already," she insisted. "I think I passed out at the party. Missy went off with some guy from a frat house." It was so hard not to deliver a lecture, but she wasn't my kid. I took her hand and she got to her feet. She fumbled for her keys, which she'd forgotten to take out of the ignition. When she stood up and faced me, I was shocked at how ravaged her face was. She looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her. "Clover, I know. I hate my life." Her eyes welled up and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know, hon. Life is hard at this age." I hated my patronizing tone. We stumbled toward the front door. I thought of my appointment across town, but I couldn't leave her alone in this state of mind. Who knew what she would do? I took her key and unlocked the door. She tripped over a shoe that had been left in the middle of the living room and flopped onto the big sectional sofa. In 30 seconds, she was snoring softly. Great. Now what? I took my phone from my purse and called the insurance lady, explaining I'd run into a little snag and moved our appointment ahead another hour. I eased a small pillow under Clover's head and draped a knitted throw over her. She didn't move a muscle in the 30 minutes I watched her, and I found myself getting antsy to complete my meeting at the insurance company. Wondering whether Clover would even remember I'd been here, I wrote a note suggesting we have lunch if she was up to it. I propped the note on the coffee table so it would be the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes, locked her front door securely, and headed back on my mission. Chapter 41. The insurance woman had probably never finalized a claim so quickly. I signed what she told me to and collected my check. She started to say she hoped I would insure my next car with her agency, but I was halfway out the door before she got her sales pitch off the ground. Outside, I got out my phone and checked my bank balance. There was enough in savings to cover the difference, and having the insurance check in hand meant I had no further excuse not to get myself another car. I cruised past the dealerships all crowded together on Lomas, but I couldn't make myself stop. Clover's state of mind hadn't been good. Already I was worried I shouldn't have left her alone. The late morning traffic in this part of town wasn't bad, and this time I edged the red vet into the Delaney driveway beside the awkwardly parked blue one. With hands cupped around my face, I peered through the front window. It gave me a limited view across the dining table and into the living room, but I couldn't see the girl on the couch from this angle. I was debating whether or not to ring the doorbell when I saw movement. Clover emerged from the hall that led to the bedrooms. The Afghan was wrapped around her shoulders, and her long hair fell across her face. At least she was upright. I stepped to the door, and it opened before I could press the button. "Hey, Charlie." Her face had a foggy look. "Hey, you doing okay?" She nodded, but couldn't quite come up with a smile. "Can I come in?" "Sure." She pushed the screen door open. "Sounds like you had a rough night," I said, looking around the room. Nothing had changed. "So you were here?" "Yeah, you don't remember? You drove yourself home." Scary, scary thought. Yeah. I woke up in my car out in front of one of the fraternity houses on campus. I drove home okay. Then it seemed like..." She tucked a strand of hair behind one ear. "Like I just didn't want to think anymore. Thanks for bringing me in." I wanted to fire questions at her. What potentially lethal combination had she drunk, snorted, swallowed, or shot up last night? Where was Zane? What kind of game were the girls playing? Why did she tell me she hated her life? But the vulnerability was still there. It would be like firing a gunshot next to a baby deer. She would probably tuck herself into a ball and cower in fright. I took a different tactic. "Look, I was hoping for some company today. Drake and I found this little cabin on the east side of the mountain, and I wanted to walk up for a closer look. You feel like getting outside a bit?" It was probably a dumb idea. She looked like she needed about 20 hours of sleep followed by a salon makeover. "Can we get some breakfast on the way?" "Absolutely. I know a great place." She stared down at the short shorts and tank top she'd been wearing when she came home. "Let me shower and change out of these clothes." I made 2 travel mugs using their machine with the plastic cups of specialty coffees, helping myself to supplies in the messy kitchen. Clover emerged 20 minutes later, looking like a new person. She'd pulled her wet hair up with a clip, and her face looked fresh and younger, without the heavy eye makeup. Her manner was still subdued, but for someone who dragged herself home after an all-night party, she was moving amazingly well. I supposed I could have done the same at 19. I pulled out the keys to the loaner red sports car. Despite Clover's improved appearance, there was no way I would trust her to drive. Rush hours were over and the lunch crowd not quite out yet, so traffic was almost sane as we headed east on I-40. "Where are we going?" she asked, shifting in her seat as we entered Tijeras Canyon. "There's a little cafe up here. You can't see it from the freeway, but we discovered it a few years ago. The guy makes the best breakfast burrito." I glanced her direction with a smile. The biscuits and gravy are absolute heaven, too. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a moment. I bet the last time I had biscuits and gravy was when Mrs. Higgins babysat us as kids. I had to laugh. The dish was one of Elsa's breakfast specialties. She'd filled my young tummy with it many times. I found the cafe, which looked smaller and more rustic than I'd remembered. Clover gave it a skeptical eye. The Corvette stood out among the pickup trucks in the small parking lot. I really do need to get serious about shopping for a vehicle, I said, once we'd taken seats at a corner table and made our menu choices. Any ideas? I always liked your Jeep. Get another one. Now on her second cup of coffee, she'd revived. If it were me, I'd get a sportier one. Some of the models look like any old sedan. You're a sporty person, Charlie. Thanks. Coming from someone your age, that's a high compliment, I think. She gave me a wan smile. The first since dragging herself out of her car and informing me she hated her life. I wanted to get into the subject, ask the difficult questions, but our food arrived and the moment was lost. As we dug in, our limited conversation turned to the meal, and the fact that Mr. Randall's biscuits really were just a little better than Elsa's. Our neighbor had him beat on the gravy, though. There was something about the way she seasoned hers. By the time we finished eating, Clover's mood lifted, and she'd nearly convinced me to run back to town and visit the Jeep dealership. My dad is really good friends with the guy. He could get you a good deal on a new one, she offered. Except he's in some other country right now? Well, yeah, I talked to him for you if you want. Thanks, I'll think about it. I'm not above doing a little name dropping if I go there. I'll tell him your dad is my neighbor. By her smile, I realized she had very few opportunities to help people, and she'd enjoyed offering me this one little thing. So, you ready for a walk up to this spectacular cabin I told you about? I thought you said it was a tiny place. Spectacularly tiny. Yeah, it's not much. I want to see if it's as good on a second view as I thought it was the first time. Clover grabbed the breakfast check, pulling a debit card from her purse to pay. I let her cover the meals, and I laid a little cash on the table for the tip. Taking the role of an adult was new to her, and she seemed to enjoy it. Back in the car, we put the top down and let the warm spring air tussle our hair. I felt reassured at Clover's improved disposition. Maybe her comment this morning had been made in the aftermath of a hangover. We cruised along the east side of the Sandia Mountains, through the little village of Cedar Crest. I'd printed an aerial view of the cabin and hoped I would spot the turn. We would be driving past the small towns of Golden and Madrid, where I'd spotted Bobby Laurento that day at the wine festival. At some point after that, about 7 miles farther on, there should be a narrow dirt road with a turnout. Maria Greenwood had described her family parking alongside it when they went to visit Grandma Sarah. After that, we would be on foot. The 4-lane road narrowed to 2 when we passed the turn to Sandia Peak. A big portion of the traffic went that way, up to the ski runs in winter, to the picnic areas in summer. It was a winding, scenic drive nearly all Albuquerque natives had taken at some point in their lives. I slowed my speed to adapt to the road's width. Clover had become quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked, hoping she wasn't about to lose her breakfast or something. She nodded, but her face was pale. "I can stop if you're feeling ill." She took a deep breath. No, I'm fine." She attempted a smile, but it didn't reassure me. I watched from the corner of my eye as I came up with inane conversation to take her mind off her stomach, taking the curves in the road more slowly. By the time we'd passed through both of the East Mountain towns, where she'd declined offers to stop, I supposed she would be all right. I concentrated on finding the landmarks for the turnout I was seeking. Maria had said there used to be a mailbox on a post, but I was skeptical it would be there all these years later. She'd also remembered a tall pine tree, the only one in an area where most of the vegetation was pinon, sage, and cedar. The tree could also be long gone. I intended to rely on Drake's sectional map, together with the aerial photo. We had done some measurements and calculated the path to the cabin began 6.9 miles from the ballpark at Madrid. I had my eye on the odometer. We rounded a curve in the road, and there it was, the pine tree and the turnout. I passed it a little too fast and had to turn around. When I steered the low sports car onto the dirt edge, I saw a battered old mailbox lying on the ground. Its post was missing, but this had to be the place. Clover still seemed preoccupied, although she followed willingly enough as I scouted the area until I discovered the old, well-worn path. "This has to be it," I said. She nodded and followed as I started out. A dozen yards up the trail, obscured by a thicket of dense chamisa and a big cottonwood tree, stood a small fenced paddock. This must have been where Sarah Locke would leave her horse tied when she went to town for supplies. With a rugged enough vehicle and a little clearing of the current-day brush, it could serve as a parking spot out of sight off the road. The faint trail led upward, the ground rising steadily a couple 100 feet in elevation, until it disappeared. Clover and I reached the spot and saw it drop down to a dry arroyo where a narrow stream probably ran only after a decent rain. The path followed the stream bed, where vegetation grew thicker. A couple of times I had to push through and look around to see where the worn trail began again. Maria's estimate of a half-mile seemed fairly accurate. We rounded a few turns, and soon I could see the cabin's roof beyond the next rise. "Good thing we wore our hiking boots," I said to Clover when we reached the clearing where Drake had landed the helicopter that first day. I unzipped my small day pack and pulled out 2 water bottles, handing one to my companion. "Ready for some of this?" Clover nodded, but she hadn't said more than a dozen words in the last 30 minutes. "Let's sit on the steps. You still look kind of pale." She complied without a word. "Clover, what's happening? You say you feel all right, but you don't look it." She stared at her water bottle. "Did something happen at the party last night?" Another thought occurred to me. "Is it something to do with Zane?" She chewed her lower lip a minute. I remained quiet while she put her thoughts together. "It's Ryan Subro, the jerk. Just because he was popular in school, he acts all entitled. He started doing the same thing to me." "What's that?" "Asking for, photos. Last fall, he was doing it with Zane. She ignored him a while, him and his friends. They all do it. One night, she got really drunk and she sent him one." I'd been through the photos on Zane's phone. I had a feeling I knew which pictures she meant. Several showed parts of her anatomy in ways that would certainly be provocative. Once she'd sent the photo, he said she owed him sex. He wanted... I cleared my throat, hoping she wouldn't describe the acts. "He wanted everything. Problem was, the minute she gave in, he started saying she was a slut. All his friends started harassing her. Put out or we'll trash you." I put an arm around her shoulders. "Oh God, that's awful." No wonder Zane had decided to get out of town. "Where did she go?" Tears dripped from her chin and she shook her head. "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay." Chapter 42. I left Clover on the porch to compose herself while I roamed the property and took a few measurements of the cabin. There was still no way to get inside without breaking something, but I got a rough idea of the interior layout by peeking, as well as I could, around the edges of the curtains. There was no surveyor stakes, so it was a wild guess where the property lines were. By the time I finished my notes and drank the rest of my bottled water, the girl's expression had calmed. She almost smiled when she saw me, but from her earlier breakdown, it was clear she wasn't ready to discuss her sister's whereabouts. Conversation on the way home revolved around my decision on a vehicle. I got the name of her father's friend at the Jeep dealership. It couldn't hurt to have a contact. Drake was on a job near Santa Fe today, but he'd be home tonight. If all went well, I might actually have my new Jeep without having to pull his attention away from his business. I dropped Clover off at her house and headed for the RJP offices. Ron was, no surprise, on the phone. I assumed the conversation was another employment background check. I logged onto my computer and started to take a serious look at the new Jeeps. The local dealership claimed the best prices in the state, and a whole lot of other razzmatazz designed to get a person to click buttons and sign up for news. I just wanted the basics. Clover was right. The Wrangler was definitely a sporty-looking vehicle. The Renegade bridged the gap between sporty and sedate, and it got better mileage. Plus, it came in some very cool colors. This was starting to get complicated. Normal office noises went on in the background as I read specs and reviews, and my head began to swim. When Ron appeared in my doorway, I was happy to take a break from my research.
Guess who that was?
No clue.
I called Detective Luan with the Major Crimes Unit in El Paso.
My brain had to switch multiple gears to remember this was about the missing Super Bowl ring. I made an impatient little hurry-up gesture.
So it seems Bobby Lorento's ring isn't the only item this Jay Livingston has scammed someone on. Luan found several other complaints in the El Paso and southern New Mexico area where a man of his description has sold memorabilia that turned out to be fake or of lesser value. In at least 2 other cases, he used the borrowed house ploy to make it look as if he lives in an upscale neighborhood.
Have they caught up with him?
Not yet, but here's where it gets interesting. They traced his real residence to an apartment building. Nothing special, just an average furnished place in an average neighborhood. No sign of Livingston, so they talked with the manager. It seems our guy moved out last week without a word, even though his rent was paid through the end of the month. Just packed his few possessions into a bunch of suitcases and loaded it all into his vehicle. The van had New Mexico plates.
Which meant very little. El Paso is not more than a few minutes down the road from the state line.
Information from New Mexico DMV showed the car registered to Jay Livingston with an address in Albuquerque.
He lives here in town, after all?
Don't know that yet. He could have provided a false address on his car registration, so I'm going to check it out before I mention it to anyone else.
Much of what we knew about Livingston so far had been fake. For all we knew, he could be on his way to anywhere in the world.
Want to ride along? You've actually met him. I only have a driver's license photo, and we all know how lifelike those are.
I glanced at the vehicles on my computer screen, decided I was tired of reading specifications. Sure, I'll go. While Ron drove, I told him about my vehicle search. We hashed that over until the subject was dead, well before we reached the Southeast Heights address. We pulled up and parked across the street from a plain Jane apartment building, the kind usually occupied by young marrieds or college kids. Tan stucco, dark brown trim, painted iron railing along the skinny second-story walkway. It had 12 units, 6 on the ground floor, 6 on the upper. Ron said Livingston's was supposed to be apartment 12, the last one on the west end, second floor. It did not look like the residence of a man with hundreds of thousands in cash, that's for sure.
Maybe he's just frugal with his money, Ron said when I mentioned it to him.
Or he's here temporarily. I get the feeling he's a guy who moves around a lot.
That, too.
He trained a pair of binoculars on the one window of the apartment, but I doubted he was getting much through those closed blinds. I took in the bigger picture. There was only one car in the building's parking lot, a 10-year-old black Celica in front of Unit 1. If I had to guess, I'd say it most likely belonged to the manager. Do you think he's actually here?
Doesn't look like it,
he mumbled from behind the binoculars.
But it's close to the time people come home from work and school. It's worth watching to see who shows up.
He'd no sooner spoken Then a pickup truck pulled up in front of apartment 3. A young guy in jeans and t-shirt got out, slinging a heavy-looking backpack over his shoulder as he locked the truck. He loped to the stairs at the east end of the building, took them quickly, and went into number 9. Before his door was hardly closed, another car parked and discharged a college-aged girl who apparently lived in Unit 2 next to the manager. 2 more residents came home in the next 20 minutes. I felt myself itching to do something. The diamond ring was probably sitting inside, just waiting to be retrieved by me. I could go check out Livingston's place. There's enough activity, no one's going to notice.
Right, and have Livingston come waltzing up the minute you've cornered yourself inside. Forget it.
But the ring, it's in there, calling my name.
Yeah, no. We need to catch Livingston with the ring.
I didn't see why we couldn't just nab the ring, take it back to the Lorentos, and be done with this whole case. What would Livingston do? Report me to the police for stealing his ill-gotten property?
He won't be happy to see you, Charlie, and he'd probably come after you.
Damn, how does he read my mind like that?
He'll be along. If the ring is in the apartment, he's not going to leave it for long. Most likely, a small item like that, he's carrying it with him.
I hate it when my brother makes sense. I pulled out my phone and called Drake to let him know where we were. He had finished his flight and was back at Double Eagle Airport, and he still had maintenance to do before heading home. An hour passed. I'd used up all the fun activities, such as poking through Ron's glove compartment. Nothing interesting there, just the usual assortment of outdated insurance slips, a wad of napkins from fast food places, a plastic straw, 3 twist ties, a near-empty tube of sunscreen, and 2 small screws that didn't appear to belong to the vehicle. Oh, and the Colt pistol he's licensed to carry anywhere. I took a moment to ponder the question of whether people actually ever used their glove boxes for gloves. I personally had never seen it. Moving along under the front seat, my hand encountered a dust-covered gummy worm, and I quickly gave up the search.
"Will you stop fidgeting?"
he demanded after about 10 minutes of my restlessness. Surveillance is boring.
Yes, it is.
I should have known when he suggested the outing. We wouldn't simply walk up to Livingston's door and get what we wanted. Experience should have told me this would become the sum of my afternoon hours. I'm hungry. My biscuits and gravy and the bottle of water had long since worn off.
There's a gummy worm under the seat.
He actually managed to say it without a smile.
If we get desperate, my survival kit is in the back.
I'd seen his survival kit. It consisted of a warm coat, a space blanket, and a collection of vending machine goodies. Cheese and crackers, packs of Oreos, and fried pork skins comprised the menu. And I would bet $1 everything in there was way past its sell-by date. It would do in a pinch, but I wasn't that hungry yet. 2 blocks north, we'd passed a Carl's Jr. on Central. I could walk over there and back a lot quicker than it was taking Jay Livingston to get home. I'd no sooner voiced the thought than I sensed Ron's body tensing. A white van had pulled into the apartment parking lot, taking the slot at the far west end.
"Take a look," he said, handing me the binoculars. "Is that him?"
I aimed toward the vehicle and the man who was climbing out. Same slim build, same dark hair with a bit of curl. He wore similar jeans and jacket as the first time I'd met him. He stood beside his car a moment, door open, glancing all directions. I lowered the binoculars. It's him. Livingston's gaze switched toward us. Oh, crap. Had the setting sun flashed off the binocular lenses? I started to slide down in my seat, but he'd spotted me. Our eyes met for a long moment, and I knew he recognized me. Smoothly as a snake moves, he slipped back into his van. It whipped out of the parking lot and headed east with a squeal of tires. Chapter 43. Ron peeled through the apartment parking lot, making a wide turn that put us in the same direction as our quarry, but the white van was out of sight. He turned left at the corner. Ron followed, and I could see his vehicle ahead at the intersection with Central. Traffic on the major street was backed up solid. Bad move, Jay. We caught up. With only 2 cars between us, surely Livingston already knew we were behind him. Livingston edged forward until a kindly soul held back and let him turn right into the traffic stream. With 2 more vehicles waiting their turns, we knew Jay could be miles away before we ever moved. "There's a light at Gerard," Ron said, making a tight U-turn back to the last intersection we'd passed. He zipped, way above the speed limit for these residential streets, 3 blocks east before turning left. We came to the traffic signal and saw it was green in our favor. "He's back there," I said, staring to the left, my heart racing a little. "He's about 4 cars back, waiting in the left turn lane." Livingston would turn exactly into our path if he didn't pull some quick maneuver to do otherwise. I couldn't tell whether he'd seen us. My guess was he would be watching his rearview mirror. Ron crossed the intersection. "Okay, this is a different wrinkle. We're tailing someone who's about to end up behind us." He's sure to spot this car. Red doesn't exactly blend into the background. I thought fast and hard. "Grab my Stetson from the back seat," Ron said. I handed him the wide-brimmed hat, and he swapped his ball cap for it. "Duck down. With any luck, you won't realize it's the same Mustang." I slid my seat back and did my best to tuck into the scanty legroom below. "You watch the road." A collision in this position would definitely maim or kill me. Ron slowed his speed and hung to the right-hand lane. "I'm letting cars pass me while we still have 2 lanes here. If he continues past Lomas, it'll narrow down to 1, and I'm stuck with whatever the traffic pattern is at that point." I concentrated on breathing in my bunched-up position. "Okay, he made the turn and he's tailgating the guy in front of him. I think he has his eye on me." He draped his arm over the steering wheel, a casual gesture Livingston wouldn't expect from a driver chasing him. I heard a car pass on our left. As the next one approached, Ron yawned and brought his left hand up to cover it. "He passed me, kind of gave me a look, but didn't react. I'm going to let 1 car get between us, then I'll edge over into his lane." "Let me know when I can sit up again. Feeling a little vulnerable here with no seatbelt." Ron was probably thinking of the pricey ticket he'd get if a cop stopped him and found me in this position. "Approaching Lomas. Looks like he's going to turn left." Maybe he's making a big loop, planning to head back home now that he thinks he's lost us. "Let's hope so. It would simplify things." I felt the car ease into the left lane and make the turn. The motion, along with stopping and coasting, gave my stomach a rolling sensation. "What happened, Ron?" "Traffic's moving better here on Central." "Can I get up?" Yeah, you'd better. Looks like he's gonna get on the freeway." Great. I unfolded myself from my tiny compartment and planted my butt on the seat, reaching for my seatbelt. My eyes refocused just in time to see Livingston's van get into the lane for southbound I-25. "This is looking like quite the loop," I said. If he stuck with it long enough, Livingston could make the trip all the way back to El Paso by going this way. Ron glanced at his instruments and back at the road. He'd allowed 3 vehicles between ours and the white one. Jay ignored the Gibson exit, the last one which would have conveniently taken him back to the apartment. "What do you think he's up to?" "No idea, Charlie. All I can do is follow." A lot of the traffic dropped away at the Broadway exit. Now no one blocked our view of Livingston's vehicle, or his view of us. I had a feeling he knew we were there, may have known all along, and was set on creating a long chase. Ron sighed. Aside from a casino coming up soon, it would be 15 miles or so before another chance to get off the interstate. Livingston passed the casino, even though the billboards said Ringo Starr and his group were appearing tonight. Who could not want to see that show? Ron actually let out a chuckle when I questioned it aloud. "You don't even remember him, kid." I was searching for a response when we suddenly noticed we were catching up with Livingston, rapidly. Ron slowed, but the white van was definitely coming to a stop. Our man had edged to the side and was pulling off the highway. Ron tapped his brakes to alert the drivers behind. Then he followed Livingston's moves as he came to a complete stop. We halted less than 10 feet behind his vehicle. Surely he doesn't think speeding up now will gain him any advantage.
I think his engine shut down.
Ron left the Mustang running and waggled his fingers toward me.
Hand me the Colt.
I did as instructed, holding my breath in hopes this whole scenario wasn't about to go horribly wrong.
Stay in the car. If he takes off again, I don't want to have to wait for you.
He reached into his shirt pocket and handed me his cell phone.
Scroll through my phone contacts and get the number for Tom McPeel. He's with the major crimes at APD. The contact the El Paso police gave me. Call him and tell him what's going on. Ask him to dispatch some state troopers to our location.
Ron waited until 2 cars whizzed by before opening his door. With the Colt tucked into his waistband, he edged toward Livingston. I couldn't help it. I had to find out what was going on. I opened my door and stood behind it, listening as Ron approached.
"Hey, man, why'd you stop?" Ron asked.
I couldn't catch the words, only the fact of a short, mumbled response.
"Wait right here."
Ron turned to me and called out with a huge grin on his face.
"He's out of gas."
"Tell him I'm calling roadside assistance," I shouted back. I hit the button for Detective McPeel. Chapter 44. Word got out quickly. 2 state police cars showed up within 10 minutes, dispatched from the nearby town of Berlin. Why is it I can never seem to understand that surveillance drags on forever and should be prepared for all temperatures and all hunger conditions? The officers had quickly transferred Jay Livingston to one of their vehicles, and a call was put out for a tow truck to take his. The flashing lights brought traffic to a crawl, gawkers unable to resist trying to catch a glimpse of blood. Ron and I were in the process of telling how we happened to be there when Drake called.
"Hey, what's up?"
he asked. I caught the fringe of worry in his voice. "We caught our suspect, just talking to the police now."
"Does this happen to be at the side of the highway?"
"Why? What have you heard?"
"It's on the news. Traffic reports say I-25 is backed up for miles, and the overhead shots make it look serious. I thought I recognized Ron's car."
Oh, boy. With the traffic and cacophony of voices, I hadn't even heard the news helicopter. I assured him there'd been no injuries and all was well. I'd be home as soon as I could possibly manage. The long day was suddenly closing in on me. When the detective arrived, I begged off any more roadside questions, asking whether we could take this up again in the morning. He gave me a look that said police work isn't only 9 to 5. But then he took pity and told us we could come by his office any time within 24 hours and give our statements for the record. Even so, it was nearly 8 o'clock before I dragged my weary body into the house after Ron took me back by our office to shut everything down and retrieve my loaner Corvette. Drake greeted me with a long hug and the offer of a sandwich, but by that time the hunger had passed, and bed was all I wanted. I showered, fell between the sheets, and didn't wake up for many hours. By the time I roused a little, Drake was already gone. He'd left a note on the bathroom mirror, letting me know he had to be out early for a spring elk count with the Fish and Game Department. The tone of the message was that he really hoped we would have a nice evening together. Poor guy, I'd hardly been around in the past few days. I breakfasted on 2 leftover blueberry muffins, played with Freckles in the backyard a while, and when she was finally tired out, I made ready to leave for the office. Ron and I had agreed to go together to speak with the detectives. I wasn't looking forward to the questions, but did have to admit that I was curious about Livingston's motives and whether the expensive ring had been recovered. I met Ron at the office and rode downtown with him. Detective McPeel met us with a gruff expression that hinted he'd been up late into the night on this case. Hey, not my fault. He could have locked his suspect into a cell and gotten a good 8 hours sleep like the rest of us. We each gave our version of events, mine including the 2 trips to El Paso and discovery that Jay Livingston's living arrangements was a sham, which had led us back to Albuquerque in pursuit of our client's missing ring. We got a lead on the apartment on Rucker Street and were surveilling the place. We had hoped to talk to him there. There was always the chance he'd mistakenly given me the wrong ring during our transaction and would trade it back for the correct one.
Yeah, and pigs can fly.
But Peel's skepticism was every bit as evident as my own. You searched his apartment last night, I'm sure. May I ask if you found Bobby Laurenti's Super Bowl ring?
A long moment went by as he decided whether to share information. Let's just say the ring you're looking for, it's only a fraction of what we found.
Livingston had more? What, more sports memorabilia?
I'm not at liberty to say. A full investigation is ongoing.
But, okay, you are saying the ring I bought back for Bobby Laurenti is among all this?
We believe so.
Ugh, why do cops speak in such roundabout ways? He printed my statement, had me sign it, and told me I could go. I wasn't sure which room Ron had gone into. I hesitated in the hallway, wondering where to look for him, when I heard a slight commotion. From around a corner, 2 officers appeared with an orange jumpsuited prisoner. It was Jay Livingston. This time he didn't look quite so debonair.
"Where's my stuff?" he demanded. "I need to get home and check on my stuff." "We're not headed home right now, sir. You're on your way to your arraignment." "For what? I purchased everything in that apartment."
Neither officer responded. I pressed myself against the wall as they passed. Livingston gave me a long, hard stare. One of the officers took his arm and kept him moving forward. The other peeled off and ducked into a side room where I caught the pungent scent of strong coffee. I eased toward the open doorway and stood to the side, intent on the phone in my hand, as if I was busy with an urgent message. From the break room, I could hear 2 cops talking.
"That was the jewelry guy?" one said. "I heard the search was pretty unbelievable." "Yeah, no kidding. Closet's jammed full. I mean full of the stuff. Lots of cash, too. We were up until 4 logging it all into evidence."
A noisy yawn.
"A cup of this stuff for the road, and then I'm out of here. Gotta get some sleep."
The other man chuckled. Footsteps approached the door, and I moved a little farther away. Before either of the men left the coffee room, I heard another door open at the far end of the hall. Ron appeared, relaxed and smiling. I caught up with him, and we left the building. "Guess what?" I said as we walked through the parking lot. Bobby's ring wasn't the only thing Livingston took.
"I know."
I just heard 2 cops talking, saying there were closets full, and cash.
"I know. McPeel told me some of it."
"How is it you always manage to get cops to talk to you? He wouldn't tell me anything." He shrugged and unlocked his car. When he asked if I was up to some lunch at Pedro's, of course I was. Livingston was squawking about how it was all his stuff, how he'd paid for everything in the apartment.
"Well, technically he did. He just paid a whole lot less than it was worth."
"But he'll probably get off. Can they make the charges stick?"
"It'll be complicated."
We arrived at Pedro's, where I ordered my usual chicken enchiladas with green chili and sour cream. Ron got the beef burrito. We're so predictable. "So, does this mean we're done with the Laurentos? Police have the guy? Case closed?" He took his time over the chips and salsa.
"I'll have to write up a final report for Marcy. Technically, she's the client. I could do it this afternoon, and then, yeah, I guess we're pretty much done with them."
I'm sensing a but.
"But nothing, really. I'm just curious about a few things. I might do a little follow-up, see if I can piece together a whole picture."
A little lecture to Marcy on choosing the wrong guy to fool around with?
Well, she wasn't too smart about it, was she?
I didn't think cheating was ever a good idea. But our food arrived at that moment, and I got a little too busy to talk about it. My phone rang as I was about to pour honey into the middle of my sopapilla. When I saw it was Drake, I wiped the oil off my fingers and took the call.
Hey there. I'm on my way back from the job and was thinking about an early dinner at Pedro's.
Ooh, a little late for that decision, but I'll bring home whatever you want. I felt badly that our timing hadn't worked out a little better, but I soon had a takeout box of enchiladas for him and was on my way home. It felt good to have wrapped up the Laurento case, but I felt an unease about the Delaney twins. Clover's admission yesterday bothered me. I just couldn't put my finger on what to do about it. Chapter 45. The next morning, Drake offered to help me finalize my new car purchase. I'd accessed the inventory online for the local dealership, chosen the Jeep I wanted, and was now ready to talk deals. Well, okay, I wasn't really ready to dicker with them, but with Drake at my side, I figured we could get through it. We fortified ourselves with a decent breakfast at Cece's and strode onto the car lot, full of confidence. 2 hours and a chunk of money later, I drove away in my new black Renegade. It wasn't nearly as flashy as the red Corvette, but I liked the sort of ninja feel. Plus, it would be a whole lot more practical as we got closer to owning mountain property. Weekend gear and Freckles would fit right in, a fact that was a big plus. Life settled down for a couple of days. Drake was handling details on our purchase of the tiny mountain cabin. While I was at the office this morning, he planned to meet a surveyor up there to establish the property lines. I'd hoped to run into Clover and take her to lunch as a thanks for the loan of her sister's car, but I hadn't seen her around. I should call. Her cell number was right there in Zane's phone. I'd missed an easy opportunity to return it the night Clover passed out, so putting it back in their house in some sneaky manner was another item on my to-do list. I called Donna Delaney and updated her with what I'd learned from Buddy, the tech guy from Innocent Times. She agreed that her nieces were probably pulling some scam on the parents. I've been thinking a lot about this. My guess is Zane has gone away with a guy, and it's probably someone she doesn't want Rick and Jane to know about. Clover is covering for her and has become very upset each time I've brought it up. I'll get in touch with Clover and try again. I didn't want to lose the girl's trust, but the only way to get straight answers might be to present her with what I knew about the phone calls and texts. Whatever you think, Charlie, I'm sure it's all right. Donna hesitated a moment. It's just, I don't have unlimited money to spend investigating. I assured her I wasn't going to send a whopping invoice for my time. I just hung up the phone when I heard Ron's booted feet clomping up the stairs. He peered in at my doorway. I just had lunch with the most interesting man. And here I thought you were completely devoted to Victoria. He rolled his eyes. Why else would I have such a dweeb little sister, if not to make fun of me and twist my words? He started to turn away, but I called him back. Tell me about the lunch. I'm guessing this is a client? A lead. I'm tying up loose ends on the Laurento case, and I happened across an old buddy of Jay Livingston's from his high school days. I followed the friend of a friend thread on Facebook and came up with Larry Vasso. He came into my office, sat on the sofa, and took the end of a tug toy Freckles brought to him. Larry told me Jay has been a con man since his earliest days. His dad used to fascinate the boys with stories of ways to make a quick buck by tricking people. They would laugh over his antics, but when Larry would go home and relate some hilarious episode to his own family over the dinner table, he'd get a stern lecture about right and wrong. He says he tried talking to Jay about it, but Jay just laughed it off. Freckles gave up tugging with Ron and went to chew quietly on a rubber bone. The Livingstons acted as if they were rich, Larry told me. They lived in the biggest house in the neighborhood, and Jay's dad had a new car every year. Larry said it was hard for him to understand. If his friend's dad was a crook, how did he become so successful? His own father kept telling him it would all come crashing down someday. Well, Jay certainly wasn't living the high life when we found him.
No, and I guess that's where the rest of the story comes in. The senior Livingston did eventually crash and burn. The boys were off to college by then. Jay had a flashy car and a high-limit credit card, and he didn't take his studies seriously at all. He spent his time making money by selling fake term papers. Apparently, once he sold a master's thesis for thousands of dollars, and it turned out he'd blatantly stolen it from the archives at another college. Back at home, the old man pulled a jewelry job. I'm guessing something like what Jay's in trouble for now, and got caught. The whole house of cards came tumbling down when it turned out everything he owned was either mortgaged, rented, or stolen. He showed up at his son's dorm room, begging a place to hide out from the police. I felt my eyes go wide. Holy cow. This is where it gets interesting. It wasn't interesting enough already? Larry and Jay watched his dad get hauled off to prison. For Larry, it validated everything his father had told him for years. He knew he would stick to the honest way of doing things, and never again would he believe in someone else's appearances.
Jay obviously didn't mend his ways, though.
Larry said Jay got weirder and weirder. He didn't stop scamming people. The liar's mindset was deeply ingrained, but instead of spending his gains on a showy lifestyle, he started to hoard all of it. The cash, the jewelry. By the time the police caught him this week, he had trunks and boxes full of it.
I remember Detective Peel's comment about the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that crappy apartment where he lived held several $1 million worth of stuff.
Wasn't he afraid of being robbed?
He wasn't foolish. He'd rigged up the most sophisticated alarm system I'd ever heard of, and not the kind that calls the police, the kind that traps the intruder. Without his codes, walking into that place could get you hit with a taser or shot.
Seriously? Rigging something like that is illegal, isn't it?
He gave me a patient stare. Pretty much everything Livingston did was illegal.
Well, true.
From stealing jewelry and borrowing other people's houses to sleeping with married women, his life consisted of unethical and illegal activities. I pondered the impact parents have on their children, and it was fairly mind-boggling. I felt a sense of relief I'd never had kids of my own. I must have remained lost in that pensive mood quite a while. When I looked up again, Ron had left the room. Maybe he was thinking of the extra time and attention he needed to give his own boys, especially as they approached their teens.
Chapter 46. Bringing my mind back to the other young people in my life at the moment, I promised myself I'd try to have a heart-to-heart with Clover when I got home. Ron had gone back to his own office, Sally had left for the day, and I couldn't see much reason I shouldn't head home and try to catch up with my young neighbor. I called out to my canine companion, and the two of us headed for the back door. My new Jeep would provide the excuse for a knock at Clover's door. She, after all, had been the one to send me looking at a similar vehicle to my old one. I started it and began to drive home. What I should be doing was to return Zane's phone. My data expert had extracted what we needed from it, and there was really no excuse to keep it. A guilty pang shot through me. Here I'd been making judgments about Jay Livingston's dishonesty, and look what I'd done. Yes, I could justify my little thievery all sorts of ways, but it was time I came clean and gave it back. I turned onto my street, automatically glancing toward the Delaney house. Sure enough, both Corvettes sat in their driveway. From the front yard next to mine, Elsa looked up. No one can convince me all old people have failed eyesight. She spotted me behind the wheel of the Renegade and began waving madly. I pulled to the curb in front of her house.
"Wow, Charlie. Drake told me you got your new wheels today. I like it."
She eyed the vehicle from all angles. "We'll have to plan a demo ride pretty soon. I was on my way to the Delaney's to return a borrowed item." She gave me the grandmother look, the one I used to get when I fudged the truth as a teen. "I talked to Donna earlier. She still wants me working on the case."
"Well, I should hope so. We still don't know where Zane is."
I filled her in on my theory that Zane got a new boyfriend and went away somewhere. Donna thinks that's probably the case, but I'd still like to verify a few things with Clover. So, can we do a rain check on the car ride?
"Sure thing." "Oh, did I tell you my lettuce out in the garden is already producing bunches? I need to pick and bring you some."
She wiped her hands on her apron.
"I could do it now if—"
A car took the corner a bit too fast and veered toward my rear end as it sped up the street, grabbing our attention. Elsa actually took a few steps away. I gripped my steering wheel, but the car narrowly missed mine. He swerved to the right side of the street and came to an abrupt halt in front of the Delaney place, sending out a long blare of his horn. I recognized the car as Ryan Subro's white BMW.
"Rude," Elsa said. "In my day—"
I'd heard it 1,000,000 times. In her day, a young man would never sit at the curb and honk for his date. Date. A warning shiver went through me. Surely Clover wasn't dating Ryan now, not after what she'd told me at the cabin about his behavior toward her sister. I kept my eyes on the house, and sure enough, Clover came out. She leaned toward the open passenger window, and the two exchanged some words. I tried, but I couldn't tell what they were saying, even with my side windows down. Clover didn't seem happy to see him, but whatever he said had convinced her to get into the car with him. I didn't like the looks of this.
"Graham, I gotta go."
I followed the BMW to the end of the block, mimicking his turns, tracking him out of the neighborhood. Ryan and Clover seemed to be having an intense discussion inside the car. He rarely looked at his rearview mirrors, and despite the fact I wasn't being terribly subtle at tailing him, he didn't seem to realize I was behind. At Rio Grande Boulevard, he took the ramp onto eastbound I-40. I stayed within a half-mile all the way, letting traffic and the Albuquerque driver's penchant for filling the smallest available space keep me from becoming too obvious to Ryan. From Clover's admission that this guy had been bullying her sister, I worried that he was now trying the same thing with her. Of the two girls, I would have picked Zane as the more assertive. If Ryan Subro intimidated her into doing things she didn't want to, I worried about Clover's ability to fend him off. In a series of moves eerily similar to the drive I'd taken the other day with Clover, Subro drove through the city, entered Tierras Canyon, and exited at Cedar Crest, following the same route north on Highway 14. A number of cars came the same direction. It was, after all, a fairly populated area. But eventually they had all turned off the highway to smaller roads and driveways, until I was the only one behind the Beamer. When he made the turn onto Sandia Crest Road, I followed. That's when he must have spotted me. He sped up and began taking the turns faster and faster. The low-slung sports car could handle it. In my new SUV, I wasn't so daring. Within a couple of minutes, I was only catching occasional glimpses of him ahead. I spoke up for the hands-free phone to activate. "Call Drake," I commanded. A reassuring ringtone sounded over the speakers. "Are you still near the cabin?" I asked.
"Just pulling pitch to head home."
"I need you to detour. I'm following a white BMW convertible up the road toward Sandia Peak, and he's getting ahead of me. He might be headed for one of the picnic areas or for the top. I don't know."
"I'll stay overhead and let you know."
Bless my dear husband for being able to read the situation and react. I dropped my speed slightly. It wasn't worth taking chances in a vehicle I was still getting familiar with. If I didn't see the BMW at one of the few turnoffs, I'd stay the course and let Drake tell me where it stopped. We kept the phone connection open, although noise from the rotor blades and turbine engine made casual conversation impossible. Within minutes, I heard the helicopter overhead. I wondered if Ryan would notice, but since it was not a law enforcement aircraft, I doubted he would think anything of it, even if he spotted it above. I kept my eyes on the winding road, where switchbacks occasionally gave glimpses of the white car, although I couldn't see well enough to know if either person inside was looking back toward me. The ride seemed interminable. I would swear it never used to take this long, but the perception was surely my own impatience, along with nerves over what would happen when I caught up. We passed the turnoff to the lower ski area terminus. The winter season was well over now, and there was no sign of activity. Large patches of dirty snow and black mud provided the only evidence there'd been a ski season at all in recent months. Drake's voice came over the phone line again. I couldn't make out the words and asked him to repeat.
The car is...
The line went dead. The connection lost. Chapter 47. I tapped the redial button, slowing to concentrate on the tight curves in the road. For a moment, I thought we'd reconnected, but the crackle cut off immediately. I backed off my accelerator and began watching every possible wide spot where the car might have turned. It appeared suddenly when I rounded a bend. The BMW was parked in a designated space where one of the many trailheads began. Hiking? Could I have misread Clover's body language when she approached Ryan's car? I pictured the exchange between them. Clover was wearing shorts, a t-shirt, and sandals. She knew this side of the mountain, at this altitude, would have patches of snow for a few weeks yet. There was no way she'd planned on hiking. Surely she was up here against her will. I parked, blocking his car from leaving, and tried to think what to do. I saw no sign of them and wondered if Ryan was armed. I didn't have my pistol with me, not that I would use it other than for self-defense anyway, but it could have made a good intimidation tool to get him to let her go. I rummaged in my purse for another idea. Zane's cell phone. I'd intended to return it, but what if I could use it as a distraction? I tapped into the contacts list and found Clover's name. When it began to ring, I heard a very faint riff of rock music from the woods ahead. The two were much closer than I'd imagined. The music continued to sound in the distance. Then it quit. I whispered to Freckles to stay in the car and be a good girl. Grabbing my jacket from the back seat and closing the door with the softest possible click, I tapped the number again. Surely Clover would see Zane's name on the screen and know this was her chance to speak to someone who would summon help. The music chimed again, this time a bit farther away. Pick up, I pleaded silently. Hello? Came a tentative voice. Clover, it's Charlie. I kept my voice to a whisper. Pretend it really is Zane calling. Carry on conversation and let me ask you some questions. I can't, she wailed. Yes, you can. Just pretend. Damn it, girl, you're good at pretending. There was a scuffle. Who's this? Demanded a male voice. Oh shit, I didn't have a story ready for this. Oh, hey, I'm a friend of Clover's. I need to ask her something real quick.
No, you're not. It says the call is from Zane. Who are you?
I had to let Clover see me, but I needed to be armed in case Ryan was. My name's Charlie. I think we met once. You're Ryan, right? I bent down and picked up a fallen tree branch, a chunk about 4 feet long. It was hefty enough to do some damage.
Clover's gonna have to call you back later,
he said. The call went dead. I dropped the phone into my pocket and lifted the branch with both hands, wielding it like a sword. The bark was rough, and I had no idea if the thing had been deadfall for a long time. It might shatter into splinters at the first whack. With luck, I wouldn't need any more than one shot. I caught a glimpse of pink through the trees, Clover's tank top. My heart rate picked up as I approached with as much stealth as possible. Still, Ryan heard me a moment before I walked into the small clearing where they stood. He had a grip on Clover's upper arm. When he saw me, he spun her around and drew a knife from his belt. With a sharp click, it switched open, and he held it to her throat.
Get out of here,
he said. His handsome face was contorted with rage. Ryan, calm down. I scanned the area looking for an easy escape path for the girl.
I said, get away!
That's when I noticed they were standing at the edge of a precipice. Chapter 48. I dropped my two-handed grip on the tree branch, holding it down at my right side. Take it easy, Ryan. This isn't what you want to do.
How the hell do you know what I want?
He tightened his grip on the knife handle, and Clover let out a small whimper. Ryan, that helicopter overhead, that one that's been keeping an eye on us, it's the police. More officers are on the way.
I prayed that part was true.
Oh, yeah? He taunted me, but I saw him give a quick glance at the sky. The police know everything that's already happened, Ryan. The bullying, the nude photos, the name-calling online. His sneer told me he didn't care. What was the penalty for bullying someone into leaving town? Probably nothing at all. I took a different tactic. Okay, it doesn't matter to you. Tell me then, what do you want? What do you hope to gain from this? I could tell he hadn't thought that far ahead. His gaze went skyward for another split second as he thought about it. I tightened my grip on the branch down at my side. Ryan, it will go easier if you let Clover go now. Harming her will only make the situation worse. Drake. I sent all the telepathic signals I could toward the machine hovering 400 feet above our heads. Send me some backup now. Ryan, come on. Let her walk over here by me. We'll leave you alone. He gave a sharp laugh and pointed at me with the knife.
You're crazy, lady.
It was exactly the chance I needed. I brought the branch up like a baseball bat, stepped in and took aim and swung. It hit his wrist with a sickening crack. The knife flew through the air. Clover screamed, frozen at the edge of the sheer drop. I followed up with a whack to Ryan's kneecap, and he went to the ground, doubled over in pain, shrieking. Clover, take this. I yanked the cord from the hem of my windbreaker and handed her the end. Pull till it rips if you have to. She acted quickly once she had instructions. Tie his wrists, tight. His right wrist and hand were already swelling, but sorry, I had no pity. We couldn't take a chance he would try to take control again. The moment he'd been secured, I let one hand drop off my weapon and picked up Ryan's knife. A narrow line of blood rimmed the blade's sharpened edge. I looked at Clover. Her neck showed a 2-inch red mark that oozed a trickle of blood. An inch over, slightly deeper, he would have cut her carotid, and there would have been no way to save her life this far from help. I felt a rage well up inside me, and it was all I could do not to kick the man while he was down. He'd begun screaming threats at me. His father was an important man in this town. He'd sue me. If anything happened to the use of his hand, I'd be paying for life. I ignored him and turned to Clover. You okay, sweetie? She nodded mutely, but her body began to shake violently as she walked toward me. I pulled Zane's phone from my pocket and punched in Drake's number. Thankfully, this time we had a connection.
Help's on the way. You all okay down there?
Sort of. Get them here as fast as you can, if you have to lead them in.
I can see lights just down the mountain, hun. They'll be along soon. I won't leave until I see they've reached you.
My legs didn't feel any too steady as I dropped my bat and embraced Clover, never taking my eyes off Ryan Subro. He continued to rant, upping the intensity of the words when she broke away from me and walked toward the drop-off, pointing toward its depths. Clover, get away from the edge. You'll be okay, I promise. She shook her head. I sprinted to her side and pulled her back. Ryan screamed her name and called her several choice words. You shut up, I shouted at him. Leave her alone. My words seemed to ring through the air, but when I paused to listen, it was actually the sound of sirens. Within a minute, they wound to a halt nearby. I heard voices as the officers got out of their cars. We're over here, I called, still not trustful enough to turn my back on Ryan. He'd begun to writhe on the ground, trying to get to his feet, but his injured knee didn't give him much success. Lucky for us. It seemed like a long time, but in reality only moments passed before 4 officers in Bernalillo County uniforms, 3 men and a woman, emerged from the forest with guns drawn. Clover and I held our hands up in plain sight. What's happened here? The female officer asked. I quickly explained how I'd followed the pair after observing what seemed to be a kidnapping at knife point. Okay, that last bit might have been a twist on the truth. I hadn't actually seen the knife until I stood here. My husband is the one who called from the helicopter.
Got it. He didn't give us much detail. I'm afraid we'll have a bunch of questions for you.
Her name badge said she was B. Ramirez. At that instant, Clover swooned against me. I reached out to steady her. Ryan, who'd remained quiet all of 3 minutes, began another rant.
Don't listen to anything she says. I had nothing to do with it.
I had a hunch. Clover, he's talking about something other than today. This particular incident, isn't he? 2 of the men dragged Ryan to his feet and forced him to limp away with them.
They'll take him downtown, Ramirez said. He can't get at you anymore.
Clover, can you tell me what he was talking about? She sobbed and fell to her knees, pointing toward the cliff where Ryan had a grip on her such a short time ago. Officer Ramirez and her partner stepped toward the edge.
Oh, shit, the male officer said.
Ramirez turned back toward us, wiping a hand across her face. Before anyone could stop me, I walked over to see what they were looking at. It took a minute to spot what they were focused on, but when I did, it took my breath away. 40 feet below, on a rock ledge, lay a body. Leaves and boughs partially covered the badly decomposed remains, but one thing gave it away immediately. It was a young woman, and she had long blonde hair identical to Clover's. This is where Zane Delaney had been for the past 6 months. Chapter 49. Officer Ramirez treated Clover gently, but nevertheless she was being considered a person of interest until the full story of her sister's death could be unraveled. A crime scene unit arrived and the rest of us were quickly shooed out of the area. When Ramirez ushered Clover into the back seat of her cruiser, I got into my Jeep and followed. On the way to the downtown detention center, I phoned Donna Delaney. I'm sure Rick and Jane will want her to have an attorney on hand. I'll find out who that is and make a call. She kept hanging on to me, I said. Do you want me to see if they'll let me stick around until the attorney comes? If you could, Charlie, that would be wonderful. The family owes you extra for all this. It's not about money, Donna. She's so shaken up, my heart just goes out to her. By the time I negotiated downtown traffic, parked, and got into the county lockup, the miracle of overseas phone calls in the modern age had gone into effect. Ramirez came out from somewhere in the innards of the building and told me an attorney was on his way to meet with Clover Delaney. She really wants you present, Ramirez said. She says she doesn't know her parents' attorney. Would I be allowed to? She's not under arrest yet. As long as the attorney is present and doesn't mind, I can't stop you. When the lawyer arrived, it turned out to be someone I knew. Ben Ortiz had represented my brother once, not that long ago.
What is your relationship with the Delaney girl?
Ben asked as we stood near the elevators. I explained how I'd known the girls their entire lives, the scenario of babysitting at a young age, and how we'd recently been asked by the aunt to look into the whereabouts of the absent twin. Seriously, I thought she'd either gone away to college, as Clover stated, or she'd taken some other whim and left of her own accord.
You think Clover will open up more readily with you around?
I shrugged. Maybe. We've been getting closer in recent weeks.
Come along, then.
He held the elevator door for me, and we went up to a room where he said the conversation would be private. When Clover came in, she looked marginally better than out in the woods. At least she'd washed her face and hands. Someone had given her some sweats and a jacket, and she was no longer shivering like a flower petal in the wind. Ortiz advised Clover to tell him the full story, not to leave out details that could later come back to haunt them both if she were arrested and the case went to trial. Clover took a deep breath. It started with Ryan and his friends hitting on us through our social media accounts. She shifted in her chair. Well, it goes back even further. We both started posting selfies when we were in 9th grade. You know, the glamour shots. All the girls do it. You want to look good. There's a lot of pressure about that. Lots of girls get depressed over their looks and popularity. Ortiz looked as if he wasn't buying the seriousness of it, but I remembered enough of it to believe her. Girls, especially in middle school, could be so cruel. Remarks about weight, bad hair days, the wrong clothes, and pimples really stung. If a girl doesn't photograph well, she'll do exotic makeup and use Photoshop to make her picture look better. We'd spend hours on it, doing each other's makeup. Everyone wanted to look like Kim Kardashian. Zane even dyed her hair dark for a while, but it just didn't look right with her pale skin. She got called Zombie Zane, so she switched it back.
So girls were posting pictures that didn't really look like themselves? To what, impress boys?
Ortiz quit making notes.
Yeah, to look our best.
Obviously, at some point it got a lot more serious than mere photo enhancement.
So, yeah. Through high school, we stuck with pictures that made us look our best. Dad gave us credit cards and never asked questions, so we could buy all the cool clothes we wanted. But still, you fantasize about boys. What's the first kiss gonna be like? And other things. Sex. What will that be like?
I remembered those concerns as well.
So, junior and senior year, the pressure's really getting intense. Nearly all of our friends had hooked up, lots of times. Zane was more, open about it, flirted a lot. She said she hadn't actually had sex yet, but I wasn't sure. Some of the kids she'd go off with when I decided to hike or read a book, well, they were the wilder crowd. Kids had called her Zany Delaney, forever, and she got a kick out of it. She wanted to live up to the nickname.
The lawyer clearly was beginning to wonder where all this was leading.
So it was prom of our senior year, and Ryan Subro had transferred to our school from public school. In private school, it's mostly kids of successful people like our parents. Big-name businessmen around town send their kids there too, so it's kind of clubby, Anyway, Ryan started trailing around after Zane like she was the prettiest girl ever. He asked for nudes, and she sent a couple earlier in the year, but she was basically stringing him along, finding out if he was really into her or was just being a horn dog. I guess Ryan didn't realize we were twins for a while. He'd say things to me sometimes when he obviously thought he was talking to Zane. I talked to her about it, about how she shouldn't be so open with him unless she was serious. Anyway, it's close to prom and he figures it out and he's all like, wow, I have 2 prom dates and stuff. Then he starts hinting around about having us both in the bedroom.
She wiped her palms on her sweatpants leg and tucked her hair behind her ears.
Zane actually suggested it to me, that we go along with him. I said, hell no, no way. I always thought Ryan was way too full of himself, thinking he's all hot, and he isn't. What happened then? I asked. So, we get through prom and graduation and all, and I haven't let anyone take a nude picture of me. But Zane had sent Ryan a couple, and then she's shocked to find them popping up on Instagram and Whisper, and I say, why are you surprised? I mean, did she honestly think Ryan respected her privacy, and those photos were for his eyes only?
Maybe she did think that.
Yeah, well, that's what she said. But she's all depressed because he's posting these pictures and saying she's a slut. In the same breath, he's calling me a prude because I wouldn't go along with his little fantasy. And then his friends join in, and they're saying it too.
She took a shaky breath.
My folks always offered us a big trip each summer, so last summer we took it, went to Greece with them. Just got out of here for a few months, and it was good. It was all good. I figured by September Ryan would have been sent off to some East Coast school and we'd never hear from him again. I mean, seriously, he had to grow up sometime, right?
I was guessing not.
Ortiz spoke up. Let's talk about the day Zane died. That's what the police are going to question you about.
Clover reached over and took my hand.
We didn't know what to do, Zane and me. Every time we went out, Ryan was all over her, really putting the pressure on. So last October, I told Zane, we need to get him away from the crowd where his friends are, like egging him on. Maybe away from those other guys, he'd be more real, I guess. You know, where we could talk to him and let him know how we felt. I suggested the hike in the mountains. I knew the trails and all.
I squeezed her hand for comfort. So you three went up to the place where it happened? Ortiz asked.
Yeah.
Clover's voice grew quiet.
It was a mistake from the start. Ryan misread everything. He thought we three up there in nature, it would be fun and kinky. Right away, he pulled out his camera and wanted us to open our shirts and let him take pictures. Zane tried to laugh it off like she always did, but I yelled at him and told him to grow up.
Her pressure on my hand increased.
He got really ugly then, like all in a rage. He started screaming all these filthy names at us both. It made me furious. I just felt this awful anger inside me, and I wanted to push him off the edge of the cliff. He charged at me, and I swear I would have let him fall.
A deep breath.
He was pretty agile, though, and when he got right to the edge of the drop-off, he, swerved to the side. He grabbed for Zane, or maybe she grabbed for him. I don't know for sure. It happened really fast. She went over the edge. We looked down, and there she was.
A sob escaped.
I swear, it just happened so fast. I was stunned.
Her voice was ragged. What did Ryan say?
He was panting and looking scared for a minute, but then he stood up straight and looked right at me. You pushed your sister, he said. And I said, no way, you pushed her. But I didn't know. It happened so fast. I had some scratches on my arm, and he pointed them and said, see, the cops see those scratches and they'll know it was you. He started to come toward me, and I could tell he was thinking about pushing me too. I ran toward the car, and he caught me and threw me on the ground. You aren't telling anyone, he said to me. Not the police, not your parents, no one. He said if I told anyone at all, he would come back and kill me, and it wouldn't be a quick death like Zane got.
She'd nearly crushed the bones in my fingers by now, but I couldn't ask her to let go. The poor girl was reliving the trauma she'd held inside for months. Go through it with me now, the lawyer said. Tell me exactly what you did next.
Ryan had his hand at my throat, and he made me promise to go along with what he suggested. I was so close to blacking out, I just agreed with him. The first thing he did was, oh God, he raped me. He was brutal and excited all at the same time. Afterward, I cried, and the more I cried, the more he smiled. I felt dirty and cheap, and I was such a fool.
He's a sick, sick person. You didn't deserve that, I said. Ortiz's pen had paused over his notepad.
Okay.
Clover took a ragged breath.
I know you just need the facts. Ryan got up and started finding boughs from the trees, leaves, pine needles and stuff, and he started tossing them over the cliff onto Zane's body. After a couple of minutes, he grabbed me by the arm and dragged me back to his car. All the way home, he made up the story and told me what we would say.
The lawyer was making notes now.
He said it would be up to me to convince everyone that we all three came back from our hike that day. I was to say my sister was alive and perfectly well. I was to go out with her friends and pretend to be her. Once we were sure no one was questioning anything, we'd come up with another story. Tell people Zane had gone away to school or that she'd met a man. He stayed at our house for 3 days, drilling me on the story, making sure I wouldn't change my mind. We even went to a party the next day, with me posing as Zane to establish she was fine. You used Zane's phone to make calls, even to your parents, and you imitated her. You posted to her social media accounts and everything. Yeah, how did you know?
I turned to Ortiz.
Several people became concerned, neighbors, the girl's aunt, so I started trying to spot the two girls together. You were spying on me?
Clover seemed shocked.
They wanted verification you both were okay, sweetie. You didn't really think you could keep Zane hidden forever, did you? We thought the story of Zane going away to school would work. Then we'd say she met an older man and moved away with him. Ryan said if her body was ever found, the other man would be the natural suspect.
Her face crumpled and tears flowed.
We just couldn't think past the next few days at a time.
How did Ryan treat you after that day?
Ortiz was clearly looking for something he could build into a defense for her.
Clover dissolved into hysterical sobs and buried her head in my shoulder.
Chapter 50. Clearly the girl was exhausted. The harrowing events on the mountainside and reliving the tragedy had taken a huge toll. I convinced the attorney to let the rest of the story come after giving her a break, although I knew Clover would have to repeat the events many times, to the police, the court, and her own family, before it was done. It all came out in grueling detail over the next few weeks. The media leaped on the twin killer story as if it were the trial of the century. I'm sure a bad terrorist attack could have redirected attention from the local story, but for now it was Albuquerque's moment in the national spotlight. The Subro family hired a famous attorney who proceeded to paint Zane and Clover as vixens who'd led their wholesome son into a life of sin and crime. So naturally, the Delaney family rallied. Rick and Jane flew home and started volleying cannons of their own toward the Subros, making it known all along that they'd left the set of a major Hollywood motion picture to be at their daughter's side. Both young people were out on hefty bonds. I didn't know about Ryan, but Clover had become basically a prisoner in her own home because of the media vans out front. Endless shots of the 2 Corvettes in the driveway were about the only thing of interest they could broadcast, but lack of compelling video didn't stop them. I had to hand it to our local legal system and the hard-working people who ignored the media and the chest-thumping of the families and took the time to ferret out the clues and evidence. The charges were manslaughter and obstruction of justice against Clover. Ryan's DNA on Zane's clothing still had the authorities deciding whether his actions were to be considered manslaughter or premeditated. I visited Clover a couple of times before the trial, times when we mainly reminisced about playing Candyland at Elsa's house, and about the year I'd helped hide the Easter eggs. I thought she and Zane were so adorable in their fluffy pastel dresses as they hunted them. One talk turned serious when she asked what I thought would happen to her. I don't know. No one does at this point. I do think if you'd reported Zane's fall as an accident right away, the police most likely would have believed it. The elaborate hoax is what makes it look so bad. I know. I should have never gone along with Ryan. Even now, my folks say he's trying to make it look like I caused everything, right from the beginning. I nodded.
He's really twisted, you know.
She stared down at her hands. I knew she was wondering whether she would be going to prison.
Yeah, he is.
I didn't talk about the stuff that was being said in the media. None of it made either family look good. Back at the office, I found Ron in the conference room with Bobby and Marcy Lorento. I tried to make myself invisible so I could sneak up the stairs unnoticed, but that didn't work. Ron called out to me and I stepped to the open doorway to say hello. 2 men I didn't recognize sat with them. Ron introduced them as court-appointed officers.
Jay Livingston negotiated a plea today. He gives up the valuables and cash found in his apartment in order to make restitution to his victims.
I nodded, seeing part of the picture. Bobby and Marcy were victims. It was almost hard for me to see them that way, but in the eyes of the law, I supposed they were.
Mr. Lorento's Super Bowl ring was among the items retrieved,
said one of the court officials. 2 jewelry boxes sat open on the table. The spectacular ring, which nested inside one of them, clearly outshone the other. If I had been able to see the 2 rings side by side when I met with Livingston, the choice would have been obvious. The man who hadn't spoken yet was counting cash onto the table. When a significant stack had accrued, he called everyone to attention and counted it again so all could see. Although I had work to do upstairs, I had to admit the scene with all the loot held my attention. I watched as the money and the larger of the 2 rings were passed to the Lorento's side of the table before excusing myself. A half-hour later, Ron came up to my office.
"What a mess," he said.
Looked as if they all got what they needed.
"Yeah, Livingston is doing a short prison term, 3 to 5 years. I don't envy the cops trying to figure it all out. Bobby and Marcy were only a tiny piece of the puzzle. Now they have to meet with the person the other Super Bowl ring belonged to and return that item. And then there are a couple hundred more things."
Wow.
Yeah, Livingston had been at this for years, buying, selling, collecting. There were 2 old-fashioned trunks full of jewelry and other goodies, and the cash, suitcases full of it. While he does his time, the authorities have to sort out the mess. Even Jay himself can't seem to remember where each and every item came from. He's lived all over the country, so his victims are all over the place. It's an unbelievably complicated mess.
Some of the targets had most likely filed insurance claims for their losses, and those companies would have to be reimbursed. When I thought of the complex web of connections, it boggled my mind. At least we're done with them. We are finished once and for all with the Lorentos, aren't we?
Yeah.
He leaned against the doorframe.
I have no idea how things will eventually go for them. Aside from the fiasco with the ring, there's still the infidelity and their general crappy attitude toward each other. The court recommended they get counseling, which I think is a fine plan, if they'll stick to it.
Basic respect for each other would have gone a long way towards saving the relationship. I wondered if they would ever get it back. I finished my computer work, called out to my dog, and left. All the way home, I thought about the twins and the still unsettled mess the Delaney family had become embroiled in. It was such a sad story all around. Drake met me at the kitchen door with a glass of wine in hand.
"I've got steaks ready for the grill,"
he said. I set the wine aside and gave him a long, appreciative hug. "And I have a birthday gift for you."
"I thought we weren't making any birthday fuss this year."
I went to the dining room china cabinet where I'd stashed a blue gift bag. "It's not exactly a fussy thing." He pulled out the tissue-wrapped photo frame. A soft look came into his eyes as he studied the picture of Freckles and me.
"I love it."
"The rest of the gift comes later. There's another bag in the bedroom, one with something red and lacy inside." He gave an eyebrow wiggle and set the framed photo on the kitchen table. "I can't stop thinking about these 2 recent cases," I said, picking up my wine glass again. Basic respect between people, especially for the opposite sex, would have kept either situation from getting out of control. He nodded as he tossed the salad. "This boy, Ryan, who basically blackmailed 2 girls for sex, is this a new thing? Or was it always that way? I remember guys pressuring girls back when I was in school. I just don't remember it going so far. The pictures, the text messages."
"And as long as kids have hormones, there's going to be desire between them. What you said about respect, that's the key. If someone says no, you leave them alone."
I thought back to the day of the backyard barbecue at Ron's and my conversation with his son Justin. He'd denied sexting with girls, but he said he knew boys who did it. Maybe I should make time to get together and discuss it with the nephews. I suspected many of the kids who found themselves caught up in it didn't feel they could talk with their parents, and they didn't have the confidence to walk away from so-called friends who put pressure on them. A knock came at the back door.
I invited Elsa for steaks, too. She seemed a little lonely out in her garden when I got home.
I kissed him and went to open the door. You're the best. Later, after we'd polished off a fillet each, plus baked potatoes, fresh asparagus, salad, and a portion of birthday cake, we three sat around the table, trying not to groan from overfill. Graham, thank you for putting up with me as a teenager. Watching the kids nowadays, I can't imagine how you did it.
Oh, kids today. I blame it on those smartphones. I saw a whole TV show about those app things they use. They say programmers design those things to get kids addicted to their phones because there's huge advertising money aimed at keeping them on those pages. The kids can't live now without having people like them. It's a reward system for being beautiful or popular or whatever. And they get real upset when they don't receive a good feedback.
I had to wonder. Clover had definitely made a point of telling me how many positive comments her photos were getting. I'd seen the way she followed the apps with complete rapt attention. Perhaps addicted wasn't too strong a word for it.
Another thing, the kids now will say anything to anybody. In my day, you had to stand in front of the other person and say what was on your mind face to face. It kept us all a lot more civil. If these kids had to do the same, a lot of problems would never happen.
I smiled at her wisdom. She definitely had a point. Chapter 51. We rolled on to one of the hottest summers on record, but Drake and I had our little cabin project to keep our spirits up. By August, we'd signed our closing papers and received the key. The route by air across the city was becoming familiar. Most often, though, we drove around the east side of the mountains. The cost of jet fuel was simply too much to be practical for everyday trips up there. In the cooler mountain air, we took stock of the little house's needs. The big ones were reinforcing the flooring, applying fresh paint, adding indoor plumbing, and buying modern kitchen appliances. We discovered it would cost a small fortune to have the electric company run a line up to the place, so we investigated and opted for a solar system. Sunshine is one thing we have lots of in our part of the world. Back in the city, I kept track of what was happening to Clover Delaney. The attorneys insisted Clover and Ryan stand separate trials, which I thought was a good thing. Clover was required to spend the duration of the trial in a jail cell, and it seemed telling the story dragged out far too long. In the end, the jury found her guilty of obstruction of justice. Her parents' behavior was off-putting because of their arrogance and frequent mentions of their Hollywood connections. At least that was my perception from the media coverage. I never was able to get one of the few seats in the crowded courtroom. Luckily for their daughter, the judge had a kind heart and ignored the media's trial by television and stayed with the actual facts. She sentenced Clover to the jail time she'd already served and probation of 2 years, stipulating that Clover couldn't leave New Mexico and she needed to find gainful employment during that time. Rick Delaney sputtered a little at the idea of his daughter actually working for a living, but the judge's lecture on the subject was clear. An affluent lifestyle the girls hadn't earned, in the judge's opinion, was part of the cause of their getting so far off track. Ben Ortiz, the Delaney's attorney, agreed, at least in private, and told the family they'd better be grateful they hadn't lost both daughters. I learned all this from Clover when she rode up to the cabin with me the day after she was released. As for Ryan Subro, his father's high-powered attorney pulled out all the stops and managed to get his son completely off the hook for his actions. However, in a karmic way, the negative publicity surrounding the case sank the Subro auto dealerships way into the red financially. With little fanfare, Mr. Subro gave them up, and the family moved out of state. Speculation in the neighborhood was that they went to Texas because it was big enough to get lost in. Personally, I didn't think Ryan had learned a lesson at all, and knowing the law and order mentality of Texas courts, I was betting the destination was somewhere else, somewhere the Subros could count on leniency for their wayward son. In truth, none of us cared enough to check. We were thrilled to see Clover get out from under Ryan's control. Clover received a few job offers, but all of them scared her. Hostess in a popular bar, television traffic reporter, publicist for one of her dad's upcoming films. She wisely realized all of them only wanted her for the notoriety her face would bring to their businesses. She wanted out of the limelight, so Drake and I offered to pay her to help us with remodeling the cabin. She jumped at the chance, although I warned her she would have rough hands and broken nails within a week. I found it heartening to see the flighty girl disappear and the genuine one show up each day to work. As the weather cooled toward autumn, carpentry for the porch seemed in order. We decided to enlarge it into an actual deck where we could cook and dine outside. Clover quickly learned how to use the power tools and worked alongside both of us as we built the flooring and added lattice around the bottom of the deck to keep larger critters out. The wood siding needed new paint, and I decided to stick with the colors that had appealed the first time we saw the place. Drake teased me about being a sucker for rustic charm. It was true. Although I loved the look of the old wood stove Sarah Locke had used for cooking, the hassle and extra heat generated by it soon convinced me to bring in a microwave for summer meals. We could keep the old one for winters, and I pictured myself making big pots of stew on snowy weekends. The biggest indoor project involved partitioning the one room to create a separate bathroom and a cozy bedroom alcove. Drake drew up plans, we all helped dig a trench from the well house, and we installed pipes and a pump. Clover built 2x4 framing for the new rooms and delighted in the praise when we saw what a great job she'd done.
"You do realize this whole project would be way different within the city limits," Drake told us. "Codes exist for absolutely everything, building inspectors, the whole works. We're getting by with this because it's out in the sticks and it's not a full-time dwelling."
Sarah Locke lived here just fine, I reminded him.
"In a whole other era."
It made me sad to realize a lot more than fancy phones had changed in the space of a couple generations. "How about taking a break?" I suggested. "We've subsisted on sandwiches and chips for weeks now. Let's drive down the road and see if there's decent Mexican food to be had." Truth be told, I missed Pedro's more than I wanted to admit. We hiked down the hill to where I had parked the Jeep, and then headed toward Madrid. I'd driven through the little art colony more times this summer than in all my previous years, but aside from the day we discovered our cabin, when the photographer had been with us in the helicopter, I hadn't stopped to meet the locals who would soon be our nearest neighbors. Next to the general store stood a little cafe whose sign announced burgers, barbecue, Mexican, vegetarian. Something for everyone. We patted the sawdust off our clothing and walked in. The woman behind the counter looked familiar. Long blonde hair, tortoiseshell glasses, and a ready smile. "Oh, hi," she said. "Haven't seen you folks around in a while." "The Food and Wine Festival." It clicked. She was the one who, back in the spring, had been offering samples at the wine tasting booth. Seeing her name tag, Susie Scott, reminded me. "Did you catch up with the guy you were looking for that day?" Susie asked, bringing 3 sets of flatware to a table near the window. Wow, what a memory. I barely remembered it myself. It was at the beginning of the Lorento case, when I'd spotted the football player with the other woman. Yeah, we did catch up with him. "I'm good with faces and details," she said. We sat down and she stood by the table with hands on hips. "So, since it's after Labor Day, I'm afraid we're on a modified menu. We're totally out of the vegetarian specialties, and the last of the barbecue went yesterday. Cook can make you a burger, nearly any style, and all the Mexican dishes are available." She kept talking as she bustled to the counter and brought a pitcher of water to fill our glasses.
Sorry about the limited menu. It's just once summer's over, the crowds are gone, and it's not worth our while to keep so much in the freezer. We use it up, then we close for the winter. Cook makes up some pretty creative things, though. Today's special is the pulled pork burrito with green chili sauce and papitas. They're really good. My mouth began to water as she described it. We each ordered one. Susie busied herself behind the register, and I gathered, from conversation with the cook, she was the owner. She tended to a dozen little duties but kept our glasses filled and asked whether we needed anything more. When she came by with our check, she focused on Clover. "You're the girl from the news, right?" Clover was used to the question but didn't like to respond, so I spoke up and steered the conversation another way. "She is. We're neighbors. In fact, we'll be almost neighbors of yours. Drake and I just bought a little cabin up in the hills." Susie blushed a little and faced Clover again. "Oh, I didn't mean to pry. I felt so sorry for you, honey. I'm sure you were hounded to death by the press. I just wanted to ask a favor and see if we could help each other. Part of the reason we close here in the winter is there's a ton of stuff to do for the store and the cafe. The place gets bombarded by tourists all summer, so yeah, the maintenance is fierce. Thought I'd see, if you need a job, if you'd be interested. You could live in one of the little bungalows out back, help with the work." I watched Clover's face. "I'm an artist," Susie said, "and I like to use the winter months to paint a lot, so I have some new things to sell next summer. But I end up spending too much time building and fixing stuff. It's hard for me to get around everything myself. There's a place for you to stay out here where it's quiet, and I can pay you a bit." Clover gave the most genuine smile I'd seen in months. "Ms. Scott, that's so nice. Can I think about it for a little while?" "Sure, hon. Just let me know." We split the check. I was pleased to see Clover chip in her share, but not make a grandiose gesture to pay for everything with a credit card the way she used to do. Back at the cabin, we picked up where we'd stopped, bracing the framing for the new room partition. I held the partition in place while Clover hammered the supporting pieces. "So that was kind of a surprise. Susie Scott offering you a job?" "It was nice of her, and I think I'd be interested. I wanted to talk to you first, though. See, I had another idea." She got shy all of a sudden. "Since we've been working on the cabin, I really love doing this." I waited to hear the rest. Did she hope we could keep her employed on our job forever? "So I've been thinking a lot about it, and I want to go to trade school. I want to become a carpenter." "Clover, that's great." For the kid who thought of nothing more serious than shopping at designer stores, spending on an unlimited credit card, and keeping up with Instagram, this was a huge breakthrough. I mentioned it to my dad on the phone a couple days ago, and he flipped. Said if I was so damn sure of myself that I must not need his money anymore. Oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that. I let go of the partition. She'd braced it well. "I don't care," she said, setting her hammer down. "I got an offer for Zane's car the other day, and I'm selling it. That'll cover my first year in school. I'll sell mine and get a more practical vehicle, like a little pickup truck. And now, I think running into Susie today was fate. I can do what she said, live out there in Madrid, go to school during the week, and help her on weekends." "You sure? It doesn't sound as if your parents will be very happy about this." She nodded. "I did things their way for a long time. The social friends, the contacts in the business. Ugh, it's all just so phony. Someday I want what you and Drake have. I want a partner who loves the same things I do. A genuine guy who's my best friend. The guy I'll want to spend time with and do projects together." Her expression turned sad. "I can't believe Zane or I ever thought Ryan Subro and his friends were interested in us. Not the honest kind of interest I really want." "Do those kids ever contact you, trying to get you back in their circle?" While I was in jail and even before the horrible days of the trial, not one of them called or texted me. They don't care about me. They care about appearances. Things got back to me, things they were saying about me. You want to know what I did?
The quirky grin was back on her face.
What? Threw them away.
Your old friends?
In a way, I threw away my phone. All the contacts, gone. All the social media accounts, I'm done with them.
You won't miss them or wish for the contact?
It's not like any of them miss me, is it? No, I don't need those kind of friends. I got myself a plain old phone that does nothing but make calls. If I ever need to talk to Missy or any of the others, I'll call them. But so far, my parents, Elsa, and you are the only people's numbers I've programmed into the new phone.
The afternoon sun had gone behind the mountains, and there was a distinct chill in the air. Drake came in and announced he had the pump ready to hook up to the new line first thing tomorrow.
You ladies look kind of serious,
he said, giving me his questioning, everything okay look. Clover laughed first.
Everything's perfect.
We grabbed our jackets and locked the cabin before starting down the hillside.
Charlie, could we make a stop on the way home?
Certainly.
I want to tell Susie Scott my decision.
We absolutely can stop for that.
And Clover, I'm so proud of you.
She gave me one of the most heartfelt hugs of my life, and all at once the months of worry and the agony I'd felt on behalf of my young friend, it all melted away as I watched her embark on her new steady path. This concludes Alibis Can Be Murder by Connie Shelton. This novel is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. If you would like to receive our online newsletter listing new releases, simply go to booksinmotion.com and register with your email address. Newsletter members receive special discounts and freebies. No purchase necessary. That's one word, booksinmotion.com. From Books in Motion, this is Rebecca Cook. Thanks for listening.